For my sister, George Ann Kennedy, brave, strong, courageous. Dragonsblood. 1. Red Star at night, firestone, dig, harness, rig, dragons take flight. Fort Weir at the end of the second interval after landing, AL 507. 4 men stood in a knot around the star stones of Fort Weir. The sun was just above the horizon, casting the harsh shadows of early dawn at winter's end. Each man wore the prestigious shoulder knots of Weir leader. Their warm, ware-hide jackets proclaimed them the leaders of Bendon, Fort, Telgar, and Ista Weirs. Cleor, Fort's Weir leader, was host and the youngest present. He was also the newest Weir leader, having gained his position less than a turn before. He glanced back to the starstones, to the eye rock, which bracketed the finger rock, which itself was lit by the baleful red star. Thread was coming. Soon. The air was made more chilly by the steady breeze blowing across the plateau where Fort's starstones were placed. Cleor suppressed a shiver. Fort is still wing light. We've only had the one clutch. There's time yet, Cleor. Cryon, Ista's Weir leader, judged. He pointed at the red star and the eye rock. Thread won't fall until after the last frost. There's no doubt, then, that Thread is coming, Cleor said, wishing the other Weir leaders would disagree with him. For over 200 turns, the planet of Pern had been free of the threat of Thread falling from the sky. Now that peace would end. The red star's return would bring the thread that would try once more to devour all life on Pern. For the next 50 turns, the dragons would rise to the skies, flame thread into lifeless char, or, failing, watch in horror as it burrowed into the rich soil of Pern to destroy all organic material with mindless voracity. Telgar's ready, Cleor, Dagon declared. He turned back from the starstones and the dawning light to gaze at the others, who were obscured by the sharp shadows of the early morning light. His words were firmly emphasized by the distant rumbling of his bronze, Keloth. My wings are at full strength, and I've 2 clutches on the hatching grounds. One of the other Weir leaders cleared his throat loudly, but Dagon's fierce glare could not pierce the shadows to identify the culprit. You need to stretch that wing now that it's healed. Besides, between the carry sack and our gear, I'm carrying enough, thank you. Gren gave her a half-sad, half-wheedling chirp and beat his wings strongly to regain his lost altitude. High above him, Garth gave him an "I told you so" scolding. As he climbed sunward, Lorana noted that in his antics there was no residual sign at all of the broken left wing that had nearly cost his life, and had completely changed hers. With a frown, Lorana forced the memory away and continued on to the beach. Why didn't you wake me, you silly dragon? Jetrel grumbled, pulling off his riding helmet and running his hand through his stringy white hair as he searched the darkness below for any sign of Lorana. You knew I'd had too much wine, but you went off sunning yourself on some rock and fell asleep, didn't you? Poor Lorana, waiting and waiting for us, only we were asleep. Talith took Jetrel's moaning in good part, knowing that the old dragon rider was merely practicing his excuse on him. Talith had been tired, and the sun had been so warm. Jetrel had needed a rest himself, and the wine at Nerat Seahold had been so inviting, and they had worked hard all these many days helping Lorana with her explorations. We were tired, Talith told his rider. The sun, the wine were good. But while we were sunning ourselves, Lorana was doubtless being fried in the heat, or was bitten by one of her subjects, or... it's turned so cold, Talith, Jetrel said, putting his riding helmet back on. Almost as cold as between. What if... She is down there, Talith said, tightening into a steeper dive. Jetrel craned his head out over Talith's neck and saw a small fire below on the beach. She's probably half frozen, Jetrel chided. This will never do." Lorana leapt from her place at the fire and rushed to greet the old rider as Talith settled. Gren and Garth chirped cheerful greetings to Talith, who rumbled back. "We fell asleep in the warm sun," the dragon told Lorana, "and now Jetrel is afraid that you are cold." "The fire's warm, Jetrel," Lorana said, beckoning eagerly, "and there should be enough light to see by." "See what?" Jetrel asked, his earlier excuses forgotten in the heat of Lorana's excitement. Lorana held up a hand. "I can't tell you. I have to show you." "Well, then let's get to that fire." When he was settled by the fire, angled so that its warmth was on his back and its light good for reading, Lorana opened her sketchbook and passed it to him. "I'm sorry," Jetrel replied, guessing at the nature of her request. "I'm afraid I haven't heard of any new clutches recently. But if I do, I'll be sure to put your name in for a replacement egg." Lorana shook her head. "He still lives?" Jetrel was amazed. "Usually a fire lizard suffering such a wound will go between. Often forever." A brilliant spark of determination flared in Lorana's eyes. "I wouldn't let him." "It was the most amazing sight," Lady Minori added. "You could even see them breathing together, her and her fire lizard, as she fought to keep him here." Intrigued, Jetrel said, "I should like to see this fire lizard." "Thank you," Lorana said, dipping a slight curtsy to the dragon rider. Lady Minori accompanied them. "You should see her drawings, too, Jetrel. Lord Carl has 2 hanging in his chambers." Jetrel cocked an eye at the young woman. "A healer and a harper? Oh, you are a woman of many talents." Embarrassed, Lorana ducked her head. Silently, she led them to one of the guest rooms and gestured politely for Jetrel and Minori to precede her. A fire lizard's chirp challenged them as they entered. "They're friends, Garth," Lorana called out. "You've 2!" Jetrel exclaimed as he caught sight of the beautiful gold fire lizard posting guard over the injured Brown. "I tried to get Coriel," Lorana began defensively. "How many times do we have to tell you that you've nothing to apologize for?" Minori asked in exasperation. She explained to the dragon rider. "Lorana was watching the eggs for my daughter when they hatched, and, well..." The brown fire lizard gave a plaintive sound. Seeing that his wing was splinted and immobilized, Jetrel began crooning reassurances. "There, lad, let's have a look at you." He moved closer, but stopped when the little queen gave him a haughty and challenging look. "Talith, could you, Jetrel said aloud to his dragon. The gold gave a startled squawk as the dragon spoke to her. Then, with a very dignified air, she moved away from her injured friend. "I've never seen the like," Jetrel said admiringly, examining the splint. "A break like this?" "I did my best," Lorana said. "You did the best I've ever seen. Our weir healer could take lessons from you." Gently, he spread the wing, examined the splint, and then returned the wing to its original position. "How long ago did this occur?" "About a 7-day," Lady Minori told him. "When we first came upon the 3 of them, we thought we had lost them all. Father, daughter, fire." 2 others stood on either side of Captain Tanner. Lorana was surprised to realize that Captain Tanner was the youngest of the men. She guessed that he was near her own age of 20 turns. The other seamen all looked older, sea-grizzled, and not nearly as wholesome, wearing grubby clothes and frowns. Captain Tanner's honest brown eyes met hers in quiet appraisal. "Here's your ship's healer, Captain Tanner," Jetrel said, "as promised." Tanner's eyes widened as the words registered. He turned to Lorana, his expression bleak. "My Lord Jetrel did not mention that you were a woman." "Show him your drawings," Jetrel said. Numbly, Lorana extended her sketchbook to Captain Tanner. Tanner took them politely and glanced down at the first drawing. "Have you ever drawn a ship?" "Just now, from the docks," she said. "If you turn the page." Captain Tanner did so and gasped in awe. The sailors near him drew closer for a better view. I'm also interested in the fish and the birds at sea, Lorana said. That's why Lorana wants to journey with you on the Wind Rider, Jetrel put in. And you draw them as well? One of the older men asked. Lorana nodded. And if we caught them, would you give us a drawing of that? Another asked. Before Lorana could answer, the third seaman guffawed. As if you'd ever catch anything, Minette. You and that old rod of yours. Aye, a net's the only proper way to catch fish. There are no nets aboard Wind Rider, you git, Minette replied. Lorana could tell there was no real rancor among the three. Wind Rider is a schooner, Baror, Tanner said. She's built for speed, not trawling. The seaman named Baror looked away from Tanner, face clouded. Lorana wasn't sure she liked that look. They say it's bad luck to have a woman aboard a ship, Baror muttered. Beside him, Minette nodded. I'd say it's worse luck to travel without a healer, Jetrel observed. Captain Tanner nodded. Did you say the Wind Rider was built for speed? Lorana asked, looking at the other ships in the harbor for comparison. Aye, Minette told her. Lord Holder Tillich, the master fisher himself, had her built here special for fast runs between thread. If it ever comes, the third seaman growled. It'll come, Colfett, it'll come, Captain Tanner replied, casting an apologetic look toward Jetrel. Colfett seemed to realize his gaffe. I meant no disrespect, Dragonrider. Jetrel didn't hear much apology in the northerner's tone, but let it go. Then I'll take none, seaman. Luttrell had attended a number of major injuries. Clearly this was worse. He's a 10-year-old boy. He's been dosed with numbweed and fellas juice and was suitably wrapped against between during the journey from Bend and Hold. His pulse is thready and weak. He shows signs of shock and blood loss. Janir is attempting to stabilize. Windblossom interrupted him with an upheld hand and walked over to the large basin outside the clean room. She pulled back her sleeves. Gown me, then scrub. Luttrell nodded, pulling sanitized gowns out of a special closet. Once she was robed, Windblossom started carefully scrubbing her arms and hands to clean off as many germs as she could. She motioned for Luttrell to continue his report. We cannot type his blood. It's O positive, the man beside Mahal interjected. Windblossom turned to face him, her expression showing interest. I've been keeping track of our bloodlines. It can only be O positive, he repeated. Windblossom matched his face to her memory of a young boy she had spoken with long ago. Peter Tupperman. The man winced at the name. I'm called Perman now, he corrected. The boy is my son. A crease formed on Windblossom's brows. Ted Tupperman had been considered a dangerous renegade in the early days of the Pern colony at Landing. He had stolen equipment to conduct biology experiments, one of which had killed him and orphaned young Peter at an early age. Windblossom could understand why Peter Tupperman would want to remove himself from memories of his father. Perman, Bendon wines, she said to herself. Modified vines, no? She waited only long enough for his body language to answer her before she said to the other intern, Perman scrubs with us. She turned her attention back to Luttrell. The old needles, you kept them, right? When the intern nodded, she said, Have them sterilized and bring them in. What about sutures? The young trainee, Corelli, Windblossom finally put a name to her, arrived, breathless, with Windblossom's medical bag. My lady, she gasped, and gathered in another breath to say, There are no more in stores. Windblossom grunted acknowledgement. She looked at the Bendon Weir leader. Mahal? Mahal approached the diminutive geneticist. He bent over her when she beckoned him closer. I have one set of sutures left. If I use them on this boy, others will die later. Probably Dragonriders, she said, in a voice that carried only to his ears. Mahal nodded his understanding. I saw this day coming, she added. We are losing our tech base. These sorts of wounds are rare enough that soon no one will even know how.
This is disc number 2.
Why did you make the watchwares, Windblossom? The voice was not Kitty Ping's. It was deeper. Windblossom opened her eyes. Sitting beside her was Ted Tuberman's son, Perman. She sat up slowly. She was in her room. Perman was seated beside her bed, looking intently at her. "Your son, how is he?" she asked. Perman's eyes lightened. "He's recovering. Your Luttrell had to dose him with Fellis juice so that he wouldn't talk and dislodge the sutures in his cheek. His chest and arm wounds are healing nicely." Windblossom raised an eyebrow. "You have been unconscious for nearly 2 days," Perman told her. "You really were too old to be a donor." "My daughter?" Perman's face took on a gentler expression. "Amora did not leave your side until she collapsed into sleep herself. I had Corelli take her to her rooms." His expression changed. "I think you treated her harshly. Was Kitty Ping like that?" Windblossom examined his face before slowly nodding. "It is a great honor the Eridani bestowed on us." "It's a curse. This whole planet's a curse." "How did your son come to be mauled by a watchware?" Windblossom asked, sidestepping his outburst. Perman glared at her before answering, his lips pursed tightly. "Tyron loved that thing. He played with her and spent all his time with her. She was sleeping, and Tyron came over to her and tried to scratch her head like he had seen Mahal do with his dragon." Windblossom sat upright and tried to get out of bed, but Perman stopped her, looking at her questioningly. Her fatigue did not diminish the fire that fanned in her brown eyes as she said, "That one must be destroyed, immediately." Perman recoiled. Instead of asking her why, he furrowed his brows in thought. "An instinctive reaction?" he guessed. "Why?" The door to her room opened, and Mahal and Amora entered. "An instinctive reaction," Windblossom agreed. "I thought I had bred it out." She turned to Mahal. "That watchware must be destroyed before she passes on the trait." Mahal shook his head. "Bendensk went between already, Windblossom." Windblossom sighed. "She was very old." She looked at Perman. "Perhaps if she had been younger, she could have controlled herself." She looked up at Mahal. "How is the were-handler?" Mahal crossed the room and seated himself, frowning. "That may have been part of the problem, too. Geron, had been searched and impressed the week before." "The watchware would have been confused. The dragons are derived from the fire lizards. The parasites that prey on the fire lizards could also prey on the dragons." She frowned. "But just as you modified your grubs to aid the grape in fighting off that fungus, so the modifications to produce the dragons have rendered them immune to bacterial and viral vectors that affect fire lizards. I hope." "But time will generate mutations," Perman said to himself. He looked at Windblossom. "How much time? What sort of problems would the dragons have?" Windblossom shook her head. "I do not know." She sighed and lay back down in her bed. "The Eridani like to take centuries to add a new species to an ecosystem," she continued. "At the least, even with all the urgency of Thread, my mother wanted to spend decades. As it was, we did not have time to research more than the most obvious disease vectors affecting the fire lizards before my mother created the dragons." Windblossom sighed again. "I had the advantage of somewhat more research before I created the watchwares, but still—" Her voice trailed off. "I must rest now," she told them, gesturing for them to leave. She smiled up at Perman. "Go, look in on your son. I would like him to stay here so I can teach him all that you have not been able to." She rolled over in her bed. "He must stay here for a while anyway, for his wounds to heal." 3. Wide ship, tall ship, tossed on a raging sea. Fair ship, brave ship, bring my love back to me. Near half-circle sea-hold, second interval, AL 507. The air was cold and moist with sea spray, and it pressed Lorana's clothing tight against her body as she finished her climb to the top of Wind Rider's highest mast. The sound of the sea and ship beneath her were all that she could hear. She could see little, for the stars were hidden by cloud, and the dawn's light was still a while off. From the moment Wind Rider had heeled over as it caught the wind and the swells outside of Ista Harbor, Lorana had wanted to do just this: climb to the highest point on the ship, wrap her legs around the mast, and hold tight while she raised her arms to the wind and felt the salt air chap her cheeks. She had to wait, though, until she had overcome her fear of the heeling ship and her fear of climbing the ratlines, and then beyond the cross trees to the highest point of the ship. And she had to wait until she was sure no one would be watching her, for hanging in the wind was only her first goal. She dropped her hands. I heard about it. She looks very pretty, very fast. Much room for fish? Colfett snickered. She's built for fast runs of valuable cargo, not fish. Trenar looked less impressed. Well, if you want to stay the night, you'll have to unstep her topmasts and bring to dock here in the cavern. That won't be necessary. We'll be leaving with the evening tide, Tanner replied. Very well, then. I'll get someone to moor your skiff. See me when you're ready to depart, Trenar answered. The mooring fee is 2 marks. 2 marks? Colfett hissed. Didn't you hear the man say this is the master fisher's ship? It's still 2 marks, Trenar said. He waved his hand, and 2 burly seamen approached. Jailor will take your skiff out, and Marset will show you up to the hold. Tanner held up his hand in an arresting gesture. How much to put an anchor watch on Wind Rider? Trenar pursed his lips thoughtfully. Reckon we could do that for 4 marks. Very well, Tanner said, passing over the marks. He turned to the skiff's crew. This is the dockmaster, Trenar. He's going to supply an anchor watch for the ship. You go back, work it out with the others, and you can all come ashore until the evening tide. How's that sound? Barrour tapped Tanner's shoulder. In a hoarse whisper, the grumpy seaman asked, What's to stop them from taking her? She's one of a kind. Where would they take her? Tanner replied. Besides, she's not your master's ship yet. Until we've completed the trials, if anything happens to her, it'll be on my head. Barrour grunted acknowledgement, still looking doubtful. Tanner turned to Marset. We'd be glad to see your new hold. I'd like to see a nice glass of cold wine, Barrour muttered. Lorna spoke up for the first time. And Colfett needs to see your hold healer? Tanner looked chagrined. To the healer first, then we'll see. Healer Bordan was a short, elderly man with thick, bushy eyebrows and long, white hair worn in a queue. He sniffed the cast carefully for any signs of infection, checked the bindings, spoke curtly to Lorana about the break, and finally pronounced himself well satisfied with the current cast. You were wise not to try a solid cast, Bordan told her. We didn't have the supplies to make it, Lorana replied. But wouldn't it have been better? Bordan nodded. Yes, a solid cast keeps the bones in place better, but on the sea, where everything gets wet, you'd soon have nothing more than a mass of soggy wrappings. No, a well-wrapped set of splints will do fine. He gave Lorana a searching look. Ever thought of turning healer? Lorana was stunned at the implied compliment, and confused as I've got something for them. Lorana looked around to be sure no one was looking, then summoned the fire lizards. Garth appeared immediately and chirped happily at the dragon rider. Lorana frowned as she concentrated on summoning Gren. When the brown fire lizard finally appeared, he chattered loudly at the 2 of them before Lorana could shush it. My, he's in a mood, Chitrell remarked with a grin. He pulled forth 2 packets from inside his jacket. Get these on them, and let's see how they look. The packets turned out to contain beautifully strung bead harnesses. Lorana gasped as she saw the markings. What's this? Chitrell waved dismissively. It was the beater's idea. I told her about Gren's wing. Lorana gave him an incredulous look. Well, all right, I did make some suggestions. Animal healer in training? Lorana asked as she deciphered the patterns in the beadwork. She got Garth's harness on easily and smoothed it out, but Gren insisted upon fluttering about her. "What's got him so worked up?" Lorana held out a hand to the fire lizard and coaxed him close to her. She concentrated, focusing to sort through his confused images. There was a fight," she said at last. Then she looked accusingly at Jetrel. "You were in it. Why didn't you say something?" Jetrel waved a hand. "A lout learned a lesson in manners. It was nothing." "Nothing? At your age?" Lorana started to say more, but snapped her attention back to the fire lizard. Her eyes grew wide, and her face paled as she turned back to the dragon rider. "Jetrel, Garth never saw the man get up again. She watched for a long time." The color drained out of Jetrel's face. Before he could say anything, a man approached him, clapping him on the back. It was Baror.
"Well done, Dragon Rider. I hear you put a lout in his place."
He leered at the two of them, his eyes glazed with drink.
"And I'd say, well, in his place."
He slapped his mug in front of the dragon rider.
"Have a drink on me."
The seaman pulled up a chair close to the table.
"I never knew you had it in you, to be honest. Of course, I knew you dragon riders are a tough lot, but I figured at your age. Well, drink up."
Ashen-faced, Jetrel took a deep gulp from the cup Baror proffered. Baror turned quickly away from the dragon rider toward his friend, hiding a smirk.
"So, Lorana, I'll have to watch out for you as well, I'm sure. You keep sharp company, and that's no lie. Another round here," he called to the barman. "Drink up, Dragon Rider. This one's on me."
Baror continued to ply the dragon rider with wine and offer. Windblossom straightened up slowly. With an eye to the glass on the floor, she walked over to her cot and sat upon it. With eyes that would admit no tears, she muttered bitterly, "Such a way you have with children, Windblossom." "Mother, what are you doing?" Emora demanded as she strode into her mother's quarters. "I am cleaning up," Windblossom replied from her position on the floor where she was delicately picking up individual shards of glass and depositing them into a recycling container. "What happened? Where's Tyron?" Emora asked. "Tyron happened, and I do not know," Windblossom answered. She looked up at her tall daughter, careful not to let any pride show in her expression. "His father was dead before he arrived. He wanted to time it with some antibiotic to save him." Emora gasped, eyes wide. "That can't be done, can it?" Windblossom sighed, using one of her better sighs. "It cannot, as you should well know." "At least not in any literature," Emora replied, her face heating as she caught her mother's implied rebuke. "Mother, what's the use of learning about temporal paradoxes when they can't occur? It's more important to pass on a good fundamental knowledge than to deal with such esoteric issues." Emora found herself harping on her favorite issue and discovered, as always, that she couldn't help it with her mother. Songs that people will sing and remember, an oral tradition, that's what we have to rely on. "What's wrong with books?" Windblossom quipped. Emora frowned. "Mother, you know I love books, but find me someone who's got the time to make them. Bookmaking is a labor-intensive industry, from the felling of trees to the making of inks and the binding of the pages, things that are impossible to do when thread is falling." "So easy it is to blame thread," Windblossom said. "Nothing can be done, so we'll sing about it." Emora stifled a groan and waved her hands in submission. "Let's not go through this again, please." Windblossom nodded. She gestured to the recycling container. "This one's full. Get me another." Emora frowned and leaned down to pick up the bucket. After she left, Windblossom pursed her lips tightly and held back a heartfelt sigh. "Pain," she thought to herself. "Pain is how we grow. Is this how it was for you, Mother?" "Is there anything else I can get you?" Emora asked, as she heaved herself up from the floor and grabbed the last bucketful of broken glass. She surveyed the floor carefully, looking for the reflection of any last shards. "Nothing."
This is disc number 3.
The wind was gusting as they weighed anchor. When they cleared the harbor, Windrider heeled so much that Baror called for them to reduce sail. With the sail reset, Windrider still heeled over at a fierce angle, her bow breaking through the waves as she sped into the moonlit night. Within an hour, the offshore breeze had been supplanted by gusting winds, and the moons were lost in a haze of clouds. 5 minutes after that, the first of the rain fell upon them. An hour later, the ship was in a full gale, heeling hard over with 2 men fighting the helm and 4 men struggling to furl sail. Colfett found Baror at the wheel with another man he had never seen before. He shouted over the roar of the wind, "Where's the captain? This sail's all wrong for this weather. We're heeling too hard. We need to alter course, too. See how she's digging into the waves? We'll broach to if we don't." "The captain's not here," Baror replied, teeth wide in a grin. "I can see that," Colfett responded irritably. "Where is he?" He looked forward. "Is he forward with the sails?" "No, you git. He's not here," Baror responded, his grin disappearing in a frown. "Left me in charge, seeing as you've got that bum wing." Another gust spun the ship, and Baror gripped the wheel, calling to the other man to help out. Colfett gestured at the new man. "Who's he?" Baror grinned. "New man I signed on at Half Circle." He waved at the new man. "Vilo's his name." Another gust heeled the ship over as Windrider plowed into a wave. "We've got to let her have her head," Colfett called. "Get the sails off, put out a storm anchor and ride it out." Baror shook his head. "No, we'll keep our course. I'll show that pansy Istan how real men sail." Colfett started to argue, but at that moment 2 men climbed up the hatchway. Both looked green and unseamanly. He started to make a rude comment to Baror, but stopped as he got a good sight of the second man. "Who's on the pumps?" he asked. "You might want to check on that," Baror replied, keeping his eyes on the 2 landlubbers as they made their way toward him. "All right," Colfett said, heading for the hatchway. He nodded grimly at the 2 greenies as they passed him by. "Gentle night, isn't it?" he asked with wry humor. The 2 made no attempt to respond. Once they were out of sight, Colfett's expression hardened. He paused at the top of the hatch, looking back at Baror and his cronies. "Baror!" he shouted. He had to repeat himself twice before he was heard. "We should trail the launch in case anyone goes overboard." Baror grinned evilly. "Anyone overboard in this will stay overboard." "All the same." Baror squinted at him, and he had so injured and worn himself out that by the time they had bailed out the worst of the water, he was incapable of setting another storm anchor and had to shout instructions to Lorana until he lost his voice. Lorana had made 2 mistakes in setting the new storm anchor. She had used their oars, and she had tied them to the tiller. When a particularly violent gust had nearly scuppered the launch, the resulting drag had torn not only the oars, but also the tiller off of the stern. When the storm broke and the fog had replaced it, Lorana had made a new storm anchor out of the launch's boom. "Storm coming," Colfett said drowsily. 2, maybe 3 hours away. Lorana glanced about. Yes, there was a wisp of wind, and it was cold. The storm engulfed the launch without warning. Lorana found herself grabbing the fire lizards and shoving them down behind Colfett in a hectic instant, blinded by the sea spray and drenching rain. She barely had time to brace herself in the bottom of the launch before the little boat was whipped violently around by the fierce winds of the new storm. After that, time ceased to exist. Lorana was tossed about, frozen, inundated with freezing rain and roiling sea. When the water level got too high in the boat, she started bailing, desperately fighting the incoming rain and sea, all the while terrified that one more wave would sink them. When Garth and Gren tried to help her, she cursed them. "Go! Go!" she wailed at them. Garth's mouth opened in response, but her voice was lost on the wind. Lorana didn't need to hear the fire lizard to recognize her stubborn resolve. Gren hadn't even bothered to slow down in his efforts. Nor did Lorana. Still bailing, she grieved at the thought of her fire lizards needlessly sacrificing themselves for her. Numbly, she tried to organize new arguments to convince them to leave her. "Lorana!" Culfit's hoarse voice barely rose above the howl of the storm, and the warning came too late for her to do anything. The launch heeled horribly, nearly capsizing as it was tossed by a sudden swell. Lorana knew instantly that the sea anchor had torn loose. She dropped the bailer. The only thing left to use was the launch's mast. She bent down and started untying the stays that had kept it secure, all the while tossed horribly as the launch lurched on the sea. Finally, she got the mast secured to the stern of the launch and was ready to place it overboard. As she kneeled to push the mast out over the stern, another wave hit the bow of the launch and Lorana tumbled overboard. In an instant, the launch was lost from her sight. A wave crashed over her, submerging her. She returned to the surface, gasping for breath, frozen to the core. "Lorana!" Culfit shouted from the distance. "No!" Lorana shouted back. Windblossom smiled and patted his hand. "You are a good student, Janir." "Thank you, my lady," Janir said, gripping her hand with his. Windblossom turned to leave. "I think I'll review my notes in my room." As Janir nodded understanding, she added, "If you need me, I will be sure to send someone for you, my lady." Janir bit his lip reflectively. "I hope you are not too concerned about the memory loss. It's concentrated in your short-term and recent memories." Windblossom turned back to face him as he continued. "Your knowledge of genetics is as good as it ever was, and should remain so." "Yes," Windblossom replied, turning back to the door. "But I am trying to learn reconstructive facial surgery, Janir." She left before the embarrassed healer could form any reply. Tyron leaned into his stroke as he beat out the all clear. He had filled out and muscled up from the awkward 16-year-old he had been when he first joined the tower. Now, at 18, his body was lean and tightly muscled from daily work. He grinned as he heard his drum beats echoing back along the cliff wall that housed Fort Hold. The echo didn't mask the responses from the higher-pitched, walking drummers in the surrounding minor holds and fields. Jendel had been right to argue for siting the drum tower built between Fort Hold and the college. The shape of the cliffs made a natural reflector that concentrated the sound of his drum. Because the location left the large drum exposed to all elements, and particularly susceptible to thread, it was secured in one of the rooms beside the drum tower during threadfall. Jendel had made a habit of drilling his drummers in disassembling and reassembling the large drum. Tyron and Rodar, working as a team, had set the best time. Tyron had come to the drum tower at a propitious time. The tower had only been completed a month before, and Jendel had still been experimenting with the best way to use the drums. Tyron had quickly learned the original code, mastered it, and developed a second, superior set of drum codes that Jendel and the rest of the drummers had enthusiastically adopted. When Tyron had first escaped to the drum tower, he had expected to be unceremoniously hauled back to Windblossom. It had been half a year before he had allowed himself to believe that he had been left to fend for himself. It had taken him much longer to recognize that his place within the college was secure. Tyron took advantage of his lofty and panoramic position to drink in the sights and sounds below him. When he was up here, 2 stories high, and several dragon lengths from both the college and the last of the hot boxes failed, so it's all cold, Tyron warned. Rodar had already dipped a finger into his bowl of the whitish soup and licked it. "Potato leek! Excellent!" Further investigation revealed a number of cold cuts, plenty of fresh sliced bread, honey, mustard, and Alondro's own special invention, a sage vinaigrette that doubled as a dressing for the greens and as a condiment for the sandwiches. There were no chairs at the top of the drum tower, but the lower parts of the crenellations were wide enough to offer comfortable, if sometimes windy, seating. "Alondro's dressing is superb, as always," Rodar said to no one in particular. "We're lucky to have it," Emora agreed. Jendel raised an eyebrow at her, so she expanded her comment. "The botanists had a very hard time getting the sage to take." "Why was that?" Rodar asked. Emora shrugged. "Mother said something about the boron uptake rates. In the end, they finally got it to go by grafting it onto a native plant. Mother says it doesn't taste quite the same as the original.
She's one of the few left who'd know, Jendel said.
I like the flavor, Tyron declared. What's the difference? Rodar asked Amora. Amora shrugged. I never asked her.
The dean of the college not asking?
Rodar was amazed. Amora shook her head. I was a student of my mother's at the time. Ah, Tyron said. He and Amora exchanged looks of understanding. Did they adapt all the earth fauna, or what? Rodar wondered. He looked at Amora. Would you know? Most of the adaptations were done before crossing, Amora answered. But I believe that the botanists and Kitty Ping had to drop a few adaptations. Some of it was a question of resources. And some of it? Rodar prompted. Amora grinned. Some of it was by choice. Apparently there was something called okra that was dropped by mutual consent.
I'm surprised they didn't drop spinach then, Jendel noted sourly, pushing a few spinach leaves about his otherwise empty salad bowl.
Ah, but that's good for you, Tyron said. They were pretty selective about their animals, too, Rodar noted sourly. They had complete gene banks at landing, Amora said, adding dryly. I think the original growth plans were interrupted. Did they have elephants in the gene banks? Rodar persisted.
Oh, not that again,
Jendel groaned. Tyron shook his head and smiled. Yes, they had elephants, Amora said.
We sure could use them, Rodar complained.
As beasts of burden, they're not. Tyron tried to steer the conversation in a different direction before he found himself having to deal with embarrassing issues. He had said that while it was important to increase the number of Pern's settlers until there were enough people to safely live and protect the northern continent, he wasn't sure that everyone absolutely had to have children. Are you nuts? Casa replied. Everyone's got to have at least 4 kids or we'll be wiped out, as we nearly were by the next plague that hits us. She narrowed her eyes at him and opened her mouth to continue heatedly, then closed it again with a snap. Tyron flushed in embarrassment. That number's an average. Some people don't have any. Look at the dean. The dean? She just hasn't found the right person. I'm sure she'll have 6 or more when she gets the chance. Tyron was shocked. Casa shook her head patronizingly, which further infuriated Tyron as she was a full 2 years younger than he. Really, Tyron, you need to get out of this tower more, she said. However are you going to find a mate if you don't keep up with current affairs? His anger inflamed him to respond. No one, he said, pointing to his face, is going to want me with this. Oh, I don't know, Casa replied soothingly. I'll bet there are plenty of girls out there who are willing to lower their sights. At that point, Tyron had stalked off, getting as far from her as he could. Casa didn't say anything for the next hour. When she finally spoke again, it was only to say to herself, Storm's coming. I can feel it. Tyron heard her, as he knew she had intended. He was still irritated with her, but grateful for the warning. Early on, it had been established that Casa had excellent weather sense. He looked around and saw only a few scattered clouds above. To the west, he could see some cumulus clouds building up into larger thunderclouds. He sniffed the air. It was preternaturally clean, as though all the ions had been swept out of it, like shortly before a big storm. We should get word from the West Tower soon, Tyron said to himself, but also loud enough that Casa could hear him. Casa disagreed. It might slip north of them. Tyron was about to turn around and engage her directly in conversation when a loud boom and a rush of cold air heralded the arrival of a dragon, a large, bronze dragon. A halo of condensed air swirled around it as it glided in low for a quick landing between the tower and the college. Tyron had grabbed a small drum and was darting down the stairs, telling Casa, I'll go, in an instant. Go, go, Casa had replied, a broad grin on her face. I'll relay.
This is disc number 4.
When the fever had struck, Wind Blossom's skills as a doctor were in high demand. She drove herself harder than any other, often surviving for weeks on end only on naps snatched here and there, and she spent as much time as she could tending Emily Bowl. Wind Blossom and Emily were both too honest to deny that the old governor of Tau City would not survive this infectious siege. Wind Blossom prescribed what palliatives she could, and did everything in her power to make the older woman's passing as painless as possible. Late in the night, when Wind Blossom and Emily had convinced poor Pierre de Courcy, Emily's husband, to take some rest, Emily tossed fitfully on her bed. "If I'm going to die, I wish I'd hurry up," she said bitterly, after one more racking cough had torn through her body. "Maybe you will recover," Wind Blossom suggested. When Emily glared at her, she persisted. "It's possible. We don't know enough about this illness." She regretted her last sentence, even as Emily gathered about her the indomitable aura of the governor of Tau City, and demanded, "How many have died, Wind Blossom? Pierre wouldn't tell me. Paul wouldn't tell me. Tell me." "I don't know," Wind Blossom replied honestly. "They've started mass burials. The last count was over 1,500. "Out of 9,000, Emily gasped. "That's over 1/6 of the colony." Wind Blossom nodded. Emily's eyes narrowed. "It's going to get worse, isn't it?" Wind Blossom said nothing. "The Dragonriders? Are they all right?" Emily demanded. When Wind Blossom nodded, Emily sighed and lay back on her bed, eyes closed. After a moment, she peeked up at Wind Blossom, her lips curved ruefully, and said, "Your doing, isn't it? The Dragonriders? Some of that Eridani immune boost?" "Only some," Wind Blossom admitted. Apologetically, she added, "There was not enough for you." "I wasn't on the list. Paul and I had talked about this years back. Is Paul all right?" "He fell ill last night," Wind Blossom told her. Emily closed her eyes again, in pain. When she opened them, she told Wind Blossom, "Get Pierre. You will do an autopsy. Find the cure." Wind Blossom was horror-struck, and for once it showed. Emily, I don't want to do that." Emily smiled sadly at her. "Yes, dear, I know. But I must ask it of you. I did not bring these people here to fall at the second hurdle." Wind Blossom reluctantly. "Are you saying that we have one doctor for every 300 sick people?" She nodded. "Now you see why I must get going." "You must rest," Pierre said, raising his hands in a restraining motion. "Eat, drink, and we'll see. What does Paul... he's sick too. So who is in charge now?" "I think maybe I am," Wind Blossom said in a small voice. "Paul Nietro died 2 days ago, I think, and Bay Harkonnen I last saw sick in bed herself. The Dragonriders are all safe." "That's a mercy," Pierre said with feeling. "Finish that roll, please." Realizing that she was going nowhere until she satisfied the towering Pierre, of course anyone towered over her, Wind Blossom tried to cram down the proffered roll. "No, s'il vous plaît," Pierre said. "I spend more time making that food than you are spending eating it." In the end, she had 2 rolls and another drink, not water, some sort of fruit juice, before Pierre let her go. The last time she returned, Pierre met her at the door. "She's dead," he told her woodenly. "Her heart stopped beating a few minutes ago. She told me not to try resuscitating her." He rubbed his eyes, wiping away tears. "I was just coming to look for you. Where should I put her body?" Numbed, Wind Blossom slipped past him into the room. She took one look at Emily and sat down in the chair beside her, head bowed. After a moment she spoke. "When I first saw her, she was the most beautiful person I had ever seen. She would light up the room, lift the spirits of everyone who met her. She did not allow even the threat of total annihilation to upset her. When the Nathi were bombing Tau City day and night. It was Governor Bull who pulled everyone together. She worked tirelessly, always there, always ready. I had heard, but never like this. I was young, still a girl. My mother was often away, unavailable. When I did see her, it was for my lessons and her scoldings. Governor Bull always found the time to say something encouraging to me. Even when cities were being obliterated, she would still find the time to talk to a young girl. I did not know. I did not tell anyone. My mother would have been furious, and I was too embarrassed to tell Governor Bull myself. Pierre nodded. But now, she is not here. I strived to avoid that. In fact, I engineered so many changes, which might be one of the reasons that we had so many infertile Watchware eggs. Sorka's eyes gleamed. One reason. Windblossom returned her stare with a blank look. I'm curious about the other reasons, Sorka said. I'm now convinced that some of those failures were planned to make you look less skilled than you are. Windblossom said nothing. Your mother was trained by the Eridani. You were trained by her, weren't you? Windblossom shook her head. There are some questions I should not answer even for you, Sorka. A wheezing cough shook Sorka's body, and Mahal glanced inside, Taurine hovering worriedly behind him. Sorka waved them back out as the cough passed. If you cannot answer my questions, I won't hinder you with them, she said, after taking a sip of water from the glass Windblossom proffered her. Windblossom winced. I do not want to burden you. Sorka smiled. And I was trying to lighten your load. A burden shared, as it were. Windblossom spent a moment in thought. I do not know everything. I was not told myself. But you made guesses. I have made guesses too. Let me share some with you. I think it odd that such heroic figures as Admiral Bendon and Governor Bull should willingly take themselves into oblivion just after the Nathi War, when their skills were still very clearly needed. Windblossom nodded. Yes, I had wondered about that. And the Eridani? When the Eridani agreed to husband the new ecosystem, they assign 3 bloodlines, Windblossom said. It is a major undertaking. There has only been one time that I know of where the Eridani have been willing to make such an assignment without having thorough knowledge of the ecosystem in question. Here? Sorka asked. Windblossom nodded. 3 bloodlines. To avoid mistakes and provide redundancy, Windblossom said. Sorka's face paled, and Windblossom reached for her hand, placing her finger over her wrist to take the weirwoman's pulse. Your pulse is failing, Sorka. Let me call the others. Wait! Sorka's voice was nearly a whisper. What can I do to help you? Windblossom was silent for a moment. Go quietly and peacefully, dear friend. Sorka smiled. What can I do to help Pern? You want to perform an autopsy? Windblossom's eyes widened in horror. No. Outside Sorka's quarters, a group of Fort riders gathered to pay their respects. Once Mahal had wearily hauled himself up on Brianth's neck, 2 of the riders lifted Sorka's shrouded body up to him. He placed it before him on the dragon's neck. Then the riders helped Windblossom up behind Mahal. Are you ready? Mahal called over his shoulder as Brianth beat effortlessly into the air. I assume time is of the essence. It is, Windblossom agreed. The cold of between answered her. 8. Proteomics, the study of proteins, typically those created by genetic codes, and how they work. Glossary of Terms, Elementary Biological Systems, 18th edition. Fort Hold, First Pass, Year 50, AL 58. Windblossom was surprised by the length of time they remained between. When the cold of between ended, it was abruptly replaced by a different chill. It was still night, and rain was falling, lashing into them as Brianth dived around the drum tower toward the college. "What happened?" Windblossom shouted over the noise of the wind.
"I took us back to last night, when I picked you up," Mahal replied.
"You timed it?" Windblossom asked, her tone disapproving.
"I wasn't thinking carefully enough and gave Brianth these coordinates," he added ingenuously, concealing that he knew that he had already been here. "Here, let me help you down."
Windblossom grabbed his hand and scrambled with a distinct lack of dignity down Brianth's side. Just as she belatedly realized that she was far too short to jump to the ground without hurting herself, hands reached up to grab her. It was Tyron. Windblossom schooled her pleasure at seeing him into a more neutral expression, saying, "Get help. The body must go to the cold room." "Body?" Tyron repeated. Before Windblossom could give him an explanation, a group of people rushed out from the college and grabbed the shrouded body from Mahal. Windblossom followed the group in and was inside the college, heading to the surgery before a second boom announced the arrival of another dragon. Windblossom paused, but realized that she was too tired and too stressed to concern herself with the second arrival. As she started forward again toward the surgery, a wave of fatigue swept through her, and she wavered on her feet. "Mother?" Emora had turned at the sound of the second arriving dragon and had seen her mother falter. "Janir! Janir, come quick! Windblossom has collapsed!" Mahal shivered more from grief than from the cold of between as he lowered his mother's body down to the waiting arms gathered below Brianth. He let out a sob as the group carried her body out of sight. "And we can drill on reference points." Talia grabbed at the chance. Minith, at a little over 3 turns old, had just matured enough to be flown and to go between. After 3 turns of constant feeding, oiling, and loving, Talia was more than ready to enjoy the fruits of her labors. Besides, she admitted to herself, she loved to fly. "So do I," Minith agreed, once again reading Talia's private thoughts. "But the weather is awful," Talia thought sourly to her dragon. "I don't mind it," Minith said. Talia snorted. "Of course not. You think the cold of between is just fine." "The cold of between is cold," Minith replied, with a hint of reproof in her tone. "Well, this is worse," Talia growled aloud, looking toward Benik. The bronze dragon rider was waving excitedly and pointing to the ground below. Talia looked, but saw nothing. No, there was a bunch of rags on the beach. Benik's Karanth pinwheeled tightly downward on one wingtip, and Minith, with no urging from Talia, happily followed. As they got closer, Talia noticed that the rags had legs and arms sticking out from them. Perhaps they had found Jetrel's stray after all. "Good," Talia thought to herself. "Then we can go home."
"Benik and Talia have found someone," Catan said as he entered Harper Kinden's quarters.
"Jetrel's stray?" Kinden asked, rising from his stool and gently hanging up the guitar he had been playing. "Come on, Vala," he called to the bronze fire lizard dozing on his bed. The little bronze stirred, stretched, and leaped into the air, hovering near Kinden's right shoulder. Catan shrugged.
"They should be here now."
The two walked out of Kinden's quarters and out to the Weir Bowl. The sun had broken through the morning mist that had settled in the bowl, but the air still held a chill. Above them, 2 dragons burst into view and spiraled down. Gold Minith landed first, followed by bronze Karanth. Vala took one look at Minith, gave a surprised squawk, and disappeared. Talia wasn't fond of fire lizards. Catan gestured to Kinden, and the two jogged toward the bronze dragon. Kinden could see that Benik was holding someone in front of him.
"She's very cold,"
the bronze rider called out as he lowered the woman down to them. "Where are her fire lizards?" Kinden asked as he and Catan took hold of the unconscious body.
"We saw no sign of them."
Lorana awoke, warm and dry. A small, warm lump nestled against her back, and she felt blankets wrapped around her. She smiled lazily and turned to face the fire lizard lump, wondering if it was Garth or Gren. With a shock, she saw that it was neither.
This is disc number 5.
It took all of Kinden's coaxing to get the first drop of the brew into the fire lizard's mouth. Then Vala snorted indignantly and with a red-eyed glare blinked between. "I don't think he liked it," Catan observed dryly. "It doesn't taste that bad," Lorana said defensively. "I tried to drop myself." "The trick now is to get him back," Kinden said with a sigh. "So he can finish the medicine," Catan added. Kinden twitched a frown. "I had better go after him." "I could stay with Lorana," Catan offered. "No," Lorana said. "I'm fine. If I need anything, I'll tell Drith." Catan's eyes widened, and Kinden turned to her in surprise. "You spoke to Drith?" the healer asked. "He told me I was needed. That was you?" Lorana nodded. "I'd better go," Kinden repeated, clearly torn. "Go, find your fire lizard," Catan said, passing the mug of brew to him. "See if you can convince him to try some more." Kinden took the mug and trotted away. As Kinden's footsteps faded away, Catan looked back to Lorana and chose his next words carefully. "Can you speak to any dragon?" "I think so. I could talk with Talith." "There's a hatching soon," Catan began, "and a queen egg." "Jatrell thought I should be a weirwoman," Lorana said, shaking her head. "I don't know if I'd be any good, but I'd like to see a hatching." Catan gave her a searching look and then nodded. "Right now, you need your sleep." He gestured for her to lie back down. "I'll turn the glows down on the way out." After Catan left, Lorana tried to get back to sleep. She couldn't. She kept mulling over the events in her life. She felt sorry for Kinden and his sick fire lizard. She felt responsible. She knew from her work with her father how some herd beasts would get sick and pass the sickness on to others. She knew from bitter experience that people could also pass sickness from one to another. Her father had taught her that the best cure for sickness among herd beasts was isolating the whole herd if one became ill. "Even the healthy ones?" young Lorana had asked in amazement. Her father had nodded. "They might be healthy today and sick tomorrow. That's why the quarantine. We keep the sick from the healthy." "And if they don't get sick?" "Well, we leave the herd isolated long enough to be sure no more beasts are getting ill," he had told her. When the first incidents of plague had been reported, and worried rumors were flying thick amongst holders and crafters, Sinel had said confidently, "This is a human illness. It may affect the herd beasts, but it won't affect the dragons or fire lizards." Lorana knew that had something to do with the differences between native. Vala coughed green phlegm which coated Lorana's hand before she could pull it away. "I'm sorry," Kinden said. "Don't apologize," Lorana said, rising to her feet. "I'll just wash it off. Perhaps I can find a small measuring spoon while I'm up." "They're over there," Kinden said, pointing. "You certainly know your way around a kitchen," Lorana answered with a grin. "Only this one," Kinden agreed. "And mostly I know where to find the medicinals for a late night of harpering. Headaches from the wine, sore throat from singing." Lorana washed her hands, then chose a small measuring spoon and brought it back to where Kinden sat. She poured some of the herbal tea into the spoon and gestured to Kinden. With Kinden holding Vala still, Lorana managed to pry the fire lizard's mouth open and coax him to swallow the dose. "And now we wait," Kinden guessed. He looked over to Lorana. "You should go get your rest. It'll be dawn soon." Lorana nodded, stifling a yawn, and left. Back in her room, she found herself looking up at the ceiling once more, watching as the brilliant light jewels started to glow with light from the early morning sun. Inspired, she rose again, found her sketchbook and the colored pencils Kinden had brought, and strode out into the bowl. Just as before, the bowl slowly filled with fire lizards and dragons, rousing and going to the lake at the far end to wash and drink, or between to the feeding grounds outside the weir. She sketched quickly, filling page after page with the brilliant colors of the dragons and fire lizards frolicking in the warm morning sun. She stopped when she ran out of paper and, eager to show her work, rushed to the kitchen cavern. She found Kinden just where she had left him. He looked up at her, and his bleak expression told all she needed to know. "He's gone," the harper said in a choked voice. "How is he taking it?" Matal asked Catan later that morning when the weir healer gave him the news of Vala's loss. "As well as any," Catan replied, shaking his head. "He survived the loss of a watchware, and he lived through the plague. Which is more than some of us can say," Matal acknowledged ruefully, for he still felt guilty over his decision to close the weir when news of the plague first reached them. "It was the only choice we could make," Catan told the weir leader firmly, "which does not make it any less painful." Catan nodded. "We helped as much as we could when the plague was over." Matal grunted and made a throwaway gesture, signaling an end to the topic. "We have another hard choice," Catan told the weir leader after a moment of silence. Matal nodded in understanding. "Do we know if Vala's death was from contagion?" "Other fire lizards are coughing," Catan said. Matal froze for a long moment. His question, when he asked it, was, in all those 7 days, Arith had eaten scraps brought by the Weirling Master. Laurana had been amazed at the dragonette's appetite, which rapidly grew from 1 large bucket to 2, then 3, and finally 5. Arith's sleep was as erratic as any newborn's, which slowed Laurana's own recovery from her exposure and exhaustion. It was all Laurana could do to keep Arith fed, feed herself, and keep up with the constant oiling necessary to keep the dragonette's growing skin from cracking. She would wake up bleary-eyed and go back to bed bleary-eyed, never quite sure what hour of the day it was. Fortunately, Arith's newborn growth spurt was finally smoothing out, and her sleep pattern normalizing. "She's growing very fast," Pagul, the Weirling Master, had exclaimed the last time he had come to check on her. "She'll be ready for the feeding ground soon." He shook his head in amazement. "Catch her own food, too, I don't doubt." Now, as Laurana guided the increasingly irritable dragonette out of their quarters on the lowest level of the weir, she realized that she did not know where the feeding grounds were. She stopped in confusion and stood in the great bowl of the weir, looking around desperately. "Are you going to wait until she dies from hunger, or were you perhaps hoping that her keening would disturb the whole weir?" a voice from behind her demanded caustically. Laurana spun around to come face to face with a woman not all that much older than herself. The woman's face had a pinched look, as if she had been caught in a perpetual sneer. Her blue eyes were pallid, and her lips were pursed tight in a thin line. Blonde hair was pulled together behind her neck. "I don't know where the feeding grounds are," Laurana said apologetically. "Some weir woman you'll make," the other returned. "Didn't bother to listen to the orientation, did you? Too high and mighty. Expect the rest of us to look after you, do you?" "Oh, no, it's not as though we all don't have our own dragons to look after." At this point, a large queen burst into the air above them, hovering near the other woman. Arith took one fearful look up at the full-grown queen, gave a wistful chirp, was answered by an encouraging bellow, and promptly disappeared herself. In a moment, Laurana could feel Arith's pleasure as she made her first kill, and she saw an image of the feeding grounds in her mind's eye. She looked up at the large queen, certain that she was the source of Arith's inspiration, and said with relief, "Thank you." "My pleasure," the queen responded, settling gently on the ground beside her rider. "Your little one was quite agitated." "I'm sorry," Laurana apologized. "I hadn't expected to impress her." She got a feeling of amused tolerance from the queen. "I'm Laurana." "I know," the queen responded. "I am Minith." "You talk to other dragons?" Minith's rider asked, shocked. "Oh, or her dragon rises," Matal added. "Preferably when her dragon rises," Catan murmured. "Her dragon hasn't risen yet?" Laurana asked, feeling the beginnings of some sympathy for Talia. Catan leaned in close to Laurana to murmur, "We're hoping that a mating flight will calm her nerves." "Or something," Selena added, arching an eyebrow at Catan. "Ah, you found her," Kindon called from a table as they entered the living cavern. "Are you hungry, Laurana?" he asked, then shook his head at himself. "Of course you are. I can see it from here. Sit, I'll arrange for food." Kindon eyed the group of women preparing food in the cavern and shouted out, "Kiari, could we have food for 5, including one with a new hatchling?" A young brunette in the group looked up, caught sight of Kindon, and waved acknowledgement. In short order, Laurana found herself replete, filled with succulent fruits, hearty porridge, and warm claw. The others politely kept up conversation all around her while she wolfed down her food with all the abandon she had so abhorred in her dragonette. Selina must have caught her mood, for she said soothingly, "It's common for new riders to find themselves eating more. The appetites of their dragons can be overwhelming."
"Not to mention the work,"
Catan added with a laugh. When he caught the confused look on Lorana's face, he added,
"You oiled your fire lizards, right?"
"Yes," she replied, around a bite of food and still a bit dazed. Then comprehension dawned, and her eyes widened. Oh, she is already quite a bit larger than my two."
"Oiling a dragon is a large part of what we dragon riders do,"
Catan admitted, eyes twinkling.
"But if you've had 2 fire lizards, then you probably won't find 1 dragon all that difficult," Kindon said reassuringly. "At least not to start," Catan corrected.
He gestured to Lorana's plate.
"Eat up. You'll need your strength."
"I think I've had enough already." Lorana covered her mouth to stifle a yawn.
"And after you eat, you sleep," Kindon said. "When you're not eating or sleeping," the others joined in, "you're oiling."
"Dragons and fire lizards aren't the same," Matal said, directing his comment to Selina. Lorana's eyes narrowed as she detected an undercurrent in the conversation. She realized that it had been there all along, but she had been too hungry and too distracted to notice it. In fact, now that she had recovered from her encounter with Talia, Lorana became aware of a shadow of dread in the Weir's atmosphere. She looked entreatingly at Catan, but the Weir healer had ducked his head in thought. She turned her attention to Kindon. He caught her glance and imperceptibly tilted his head towards Selina. Something was wrong with the Weir woman? Lorana wondered. Selina looked pale. It took more than 4 days, using a maximum body weight dose, for the fire lizard's lungs to stop showing signs of distress. She continued the antibiotic until it ran out, still not certain that she had managed to knock out all of the infection. She had only a vague idea of what had caused the fire lizard's infection. Repeated but guarded requests for any signs of unusual behaviors in fire lizards had turned up nothing. Unbelievably, it seemed that only these 2 fire lizards had acquired the new illness. While she was busy coordinating the establishment of their quarantine, including the acquisition of this tent from Lord Mendon, who was much put out when later informed that the tent and everything in it would have to be burned once the quarantine was lifted, Janir and Amora had been busy answering questions from the 4 corners of Pern. A prime concern was controlling the curiosity of uninfected fire lizards. They had to be directed to come to either the college or Fort Holt, not the drum tower. The drum tower's watch, after the tower itself had been disinfected thoroughly with hot ammonia, had been strengthened to provide continuous coverage of the place set aside for the tent, which housed Windblossom, Amora, Tyran, Casa, and their fire lizard patient. Rain beat down upon the tent. The interior was dimly lit by glows. Through the flap at the front of the tent, Windblossom could see that it was getting lighter outside, and she guessed dawn would come in a few more hours. Tyran was sleeping oddly, one arm gently draped over a bulge in his blanket. The fire lizard. Casa, who had the current watch, gave Windblossom a nod, then returned to her brooding by the stove. In their time together, Windblossom had come to respect the young woman, and to understand that Casa had been willing to look beyond Tyran's disfigurement to the young man beneath the surface. Amora started in her sleep, and her eyes opened. Catching sight of her upright mother, she wearily sat up in her own cot. "Are you all right, Mother?" Windblossom waved a hand dismissively. "I'm fine," she said. "The fire lizard is probably also fine." She gestured toward the lump in Tyran's blanket. "And why are you up?" Amora asked, a touch acerbically. Casa turned from her place at the fire to follow their conversation attentively. "I had a dream," Windblossom confessed. "A nightmare, really." Casa looked up at Windblossom expectantly. "Dragons?" Amora asked, her body going tense. "Something wrong with dragons?" Casa repeated. "I dreamed that too." When the others looked at her, she shrugged. "Daydreamed. Really, I was awake, staring into the fire. The dream felt odd. It startled.
This is disc number 6.
Has anyone asked which holes are beading their fire lizards? Tyron wondered suddenly, holding up the bead harness that the fire lizard had worn. The little brown saw it and gave a chirp of recognition. We'll get it back on you soon enough, little one, Tyron told him apologetically. The fire lizard made a small noise and rubbed his head affectionately against Tyron's hand. Janir shook his head. We've heard nothing so far. It's been nearly 3 weeks, Emora said with a touch of heat in her voice. How long can it take? The holders aren't being as responsive as we'd like, Janir confessed. Windblossom quirked an eyebrow. There's some feeling that this is a bit of a tempest in a teapot, he explained. There have been no reports of holders even considering putting bead harnesses on the fire lizards. There just aren't all that many of them, and everyone pretty much recognizes each fire lizard. Then where did he come from? Windblossom demanded. Are there others like him, other sick fire lizards? Wouldn't they all have died or recovered from the infection by now? Janir asked her. What if the infection can be passed to dragons? Emora demanded. What then? Janir raised his hands. No dragon has gotten sick like this before now, Windblossom interrupted him. I have never seen a fire lizard sick like this, ever. But he recovered, didn't he? Janir protested. I'm sorry, Windblossom, but you know the backlash we got from Mendon over what will happen to his best festival tent. Not important, Windblossom cut him off. We must find out where this fire lizard came from. We must know more about this infection. We must know how it spreads, what its symptoms are, and how fatal it is. Right now you have a baseline of 50% mortality, Janir pointed out. And this one survived only with the last of the antibiotics, Emora added. We don't know if a fire lizard could survive unaided. Windblossom raised her hands and said, We know how hard the human population was hit by the fever year 42 years ago. Can you imagine what would happen to the dragons if half of them died? Janir's face slowly drained of all color. 11. Bronze for golds, brown, blue for greens, so do the dragons follow their queens. Telger Weir, end of second interval, AL 507. And you're sure, Dinal, that the watch dragon has her orders right this time? Dagan sneered. They were up high at the top of Telger Weir, where the watch dragon was posted. Yes, I'm sure, Dinal, the object of Weir leader Dagan's derision, replied. No more fire lizards will come into the bowl. No! The streams ran centrally through the weir, servicing each of the 9 different levels of individual weirs, living quarters, carved into the walls of the weir, before falling down to the next level and down again until the waste stream finally plunged deep into a huge septic dome way beneath a lush field far below and south of the weir itself. The weirs on each level all adjoined a long corridor toward the outside edge of the weir. The corridors were punctuated by wide flights of stairs leading down to the bowl. Each weir, or those that were finished, there were many partially made weirs still unused and unfurnished, had a bedroom, a meeting room, and a lavatory for the rider, and a large, cavernous weir proper for a dragon. The walls of the finished weirs were usually whitewashed with lime, although several had been treated with dyes in marvelous shades of blue, green, bronze, gold. Some occupants had even opted for accents of purple, pink, and tan. Kindon could always tell newer stonework from the original. While there was clear craftsmanship in every bit of rock carving done in the weir, the new work was never as smooth or as clean as the original. The stairs leading from the top level of the weir up to the standing stones were a case in point. Instead of a handrail of smooth melted rock, a rope had been bolted at intervals into the wall. The stairs themselves were nearly perfect, but Kindon's legs noted a subtle unevenness as he descended to the weir. Kindon wondered if the original settlers, who had created the dragons from the fire lizards, could have come up with a cure for whatever was killing both fire lizard and dragon alike. The problem seemed more than the people of his time could handle, given the skills available at the end of the second interval and the start of the third pass. How would the original settlers have felt if they realized that their great weapon against thread would be annihilated scarcely 500 turns later? All their amazing craftsmanship and effort undone by disease and thread, and the weirs left as lifeless, empty shells, ghostly monuments to a failed past. Kindon made his way to the first stairs, those on the south, nearest the hatching grounds, climbed down to the second level, turned right, and entered the second opening into the records room. "Find anything?" he asked as he spied Catan. The weir healer was propped against one side of the opening to the bowl below, an old parchment angled toward it to get more light. Kindon realized that the healer's head was on his chest, and his eyes closed, at the same moment that his words startled the dozing man into wakefulness. "Kindon," Catan said, shaking himself and gesturing with the parchment to the light outside. "I was trying to get more light," Nanala gasped as the drum message rolled in. "Ista, Bendon Telgar," Joffrey added in a whisper. "Bendon's queen," Zist said, with a pained look on his face. Bemin looked from one to the other as they spoke. It was a moment before he could find his voice, but when he did, it was to declare with the heartfelt pain of a father who has lost children, of a husband who has lost a wife, of someone who knew something of the pain the bereft riders must be feeling, and last of all, as the Lord Holder of Pern's oldest hold. "Whatever I can do, or my hold, you or the weirs have only to ask." At lunch the next day, Kindon bounded into the records room to tell Lorana, breathlessly, "Fort Weir has reported black dust." Lorana was up on her records enough to realize that black dust was what happened when the weather was too cold and thread froze on the way to the ground. "When?" she asked. "Matal says that Cleor's watchriders noticed it just around dinner time. That would make it around lunchtime here," Kindon said. "Matal says we can expect thread to fall from the shoreline over the weir and on to Bitra 9 days from now." Lorana stifled a groan and buried herself back in her records. The morning bustle was louder than usual 9 days later as the weir waited for its first threadfall. Lorana had just managed to get Selena back into a fellas-laced, troubled sleep when the alert came. "Thread falls! Thread falls at the shoreline!" The alert woke Arith out of a fretful sleep, and Lorana spent precious moments calming her beloved dragon before she could race down the stairs to help. "Go back to your rest," Matal said when he saw her. "Talia will handle this." Lorana's eyes widened in surprise at the suggestion, for Talia was nowhere to be seen. She waited until a disheveled Banik appeared beside an even more disheveled Talia, whose mouth smirked at the expressions of the other dragon riders. As their faces remained fixed in disapproval, Talia's smirk changed to a pout. "We were just getting to bed," she said defensively. "Thread falls at Upper Bitra," Matal told her. He looked past her to Banik. "Is your wing ready?" Jatal, Banik's wing second, appeared beside him. "Just ready now, Weir Leader," the sturdy brown rider said, his gaze focused directly between the elder Matal and the younger Banik, as if casting doubt on whom the title should be conferred. Matal chose to ignore the taunt. Good, he said, moving toward Gaminth as the bronze glided to a landing beside him. "We'll form up at the Starstones and go between on my coordinates." "Catan says that there are 31 dragons with the illness," Lorana heard Drith say to Gamin. Only later, much later, did it occur to Lorana that Talia should have been helping tend the injured. Once, Lorana found herself grabbed by Catan. "Wash your hands," he told her. She noticed that her hands were covered in blood from the rider she had been tending. "Blood shouldn't mix," the weir healer warned. Lorana's hand flew to her face, but she stopped it just in time, eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't wash when I went from Jolinth to Lesalt." Catan shook his head and gave her a pat. "Dragon ichor isn't the same. You can mix it any time. It's just human blood that can cause problems. People have different blood, and mixing it can cause fevers." "I'll remember," Lorana promised, washing her hands in a bucket that one of the weirlings had brought over at Catan's beckoning. Sometime later, as Lorana rose from bandaging another dragon's wingtip, she swayed and the world wheeled around her. Hands reached out and steadied her, and she found herself looking up into a face. It was Kindon. "When did you last eat?" he asked her. Lorana tried to remember but couldn't. She feebly shook her head. "Come on," Kindon said decisively. When Lorana tried to resist, he added, "Catan's back. He can handle things for a while."
"Eat!"
Catan agreed loudly from where he was working on a wounded dragon rider. "We'll send you something, too," Kindon promised as he led Lorana toward the caverns. "I have to get back as soon as I can," Lorana said. "No," Kindon replied firmly. "You need to rest. You've done enough, more than enough for one day. But there's a fracture to set on Aliarth," Lorana protested. "Catan will see to it," Kindon said, "or it will wait until I'm sure you're up for it." He shook his head in amazement. "You've been working for 10 hours. So have you," she retorted. Kindon was taken aback. "Well, so I have. It's a wonder I'm not fainting of hunger myself." They were scarcely seated before they were served a hot bowl of thick soup and a mug of mulled wine. Fresh-baked bread with butter was set beside the soup. "There's more where that came from," their server told them with a broad smile. Kindon recognized her as Talara. "Thank you," he replied, gesturing for Lorana to eat. "There's no need," Talara responded. She looked at Lorana and told her, "I saw the way you stitched up Jolinth's wing." She gave Lorana an admiring look. "I never would have believed it possible, but it looks like he'll fly again." Kindon remembered her as one of the women sweet on Kalar, Jolinth's rider. "Is Kalar resting now?" he asked. Talara smiled wickedly and hefted a large pitcher she'd been holding in her other hand. "He is now. I doused his wine with Fellis juice." "Rest is what he'll need," Lorana, the weir woman replied, reaching for Lorana's hand once again. "And to think I grieved for one. I don't think I feel their loss as strongly as I would the loss of my own dragon," Lorana protested. "And I hope that never happens," Catan told her fervently. All the others nodded. "But even so, the loss of so many dragons," Selena said, then stopped. "How many dragons? Do you know?" "I don't," Lorana confessed. "Maybe 100. 100! Warren exclaimed. "Maybe more," Lorana added. "At the beginning of this past to lose 100 dragons," Catan murmured, shaking his head. "There were less than 3,000 dragons on all Pern," Matal said, speaking for the first time. "If 100 are lost every threadfall." With a roar of anger, Dagon slammed his hand against the table in the council room. "How many did you say?" 54 are severely wounded and will take 6 months or more to heal. 83 are lightly wounded and may be able to fly in the next 3 months, Vigin repeated. "And we lost 70, Dagon added, his anger spent in that one loud outburst. It had been a rotten fall. The weir had been arrayed perfectly, but the air currents over old Eigenweir had always been difficult, and they roiled the thread up and down unpredictably. Once the wings had taken their first losses, Dagon's brilliant array of dragons had flown apart, and things had only gotten worse. This was supposed to be his triumph, his first threadfall, his chance to show everyone who had doubted, after all the success in the games, after all his tireless efforts, that he, Dagon of Eigenweir, was the proper weir leader of Telgar. He remembered the sad day when Maureen had died, and the last queen of Eigen had gone between. He remembered how Vlan had grown old, his face seamed with age practically overnight, how Telgar, Benden, Ista, and Fort had begged off providing Eigen with a replacement queen, how in the end Dagon's suggestion that Eigen ride with Telgar was grudgingly accepted. But on that day, over 20 turns ago, Dagon had vowed that he'd show them all, that he'd prove to the doubters that Eigen riders were the best. He had vowed to become Telgar's weir leader, to fly their queen and show the rest of Pern his mettle. And he had. He had worked tirelessly, still was working tirelessly. But on the way, perhaps after the first mating flight, or even before, Dagon had found that his aspirations had changed. He was more than just a displaced rider finding a home in a new weir. He was a Telgar rider, and he was a Weir leader. He would show.
This is disc number 7.
Tyron and Windblossom were startled by Amora's bold entrance. Windblossom recovered more quickly, giving her daughter an inscrutable, even to Amora, look. Tyron just looked puzzled. The brown fire lizard had leapt into the air, but did not go between. I was explaining the sequencing differences between the dragons and the fire lizards, Windblossom told her daughter calmly. After a pause, she added, with only the slightest hint of a purr in her voice, "Were you enjoying the end of past festivities?" Amora thought that over before responding. "I'm drunk," she declared. "So I had gathered," Windblossom said frostily. "What's it like?" Tyron asked, eyes wide with interest. "I've never been drunk," he admitted. Hastily, he added, "Yet." "I think it'll hurt in the morning," Amora admitted, her face still red. Why in the world would I ever have thought that my mother and Tyron were ardent about anything? Amora berated herself. "Why worry about the sequencing?" she asked, trying to sound normal. "We're looking for common immune system limitations," Tyron explained. Amora blinked, thinking, "The infection?" "I was hoping we could prove that it couldn't cross to dragons," Tyron said. Amora cocked her head questioningly. "We are still working on it," Windblossom added pointedly. "It's the end of the pass. Haven't you got anything better to do?" Amora blurted. "Alcohol blunts inhibitions and slows reasoning," she remembered as her brain processed the words her mouth had just uttered. "Like what?" Windblossom asked. Like, well, you're too old," Amora said. Clasping her hand to her head in frustration at her own stupidity, she turned around and stomped away. "Alcohol reduces sexual function," Amora recalled with infuriating clarity as she strode away. "Humph." "It was bacterial in nature," Windblossom repeated. "The general spectrum antibiotic knocked it out." "Didn't you teach me not to jump to conclusions?" Janir asked. "Isn't it also possible that the bacterial infection was a secondary infection that took advantage of the compromised immune system, just like Tyron said?" "So you're arguing that we only knocked out the secondary infection, giving the fire lizard's immune system a chance to handle the primary infection?" Amora suggested. They were gathered in one of the classrooms at Windblossom's invitation. "Exactly," Janir agreed. "Windblossom and I agreed that it really can't be proved either way," Tyron said, with an apologetic look toward the old geneticist. "But what can be proved is that the antibiotic saved Gren's life. The emergency with the fire lizard came before I could complete my analysis." Mahal shifted uncomfortably. Windblossom noted his unease. "Janir and I have talked about this. We agree that my short-term memory is fading, but my long-term memory, particularly of events in my youth, remains strong." "Is there anything we can do?" Mahal asked softly, relieved that Windblossom had answered the question he could not bring himself to ask. "Janir knows to keep an eye on me, and now so do you." "And Amora?" "I have not told her myself, but I believe she has made her own diagnosis," Windblossom said after a moment. She looked the Dragonrider squarely in the eyes. "You know how difficult it is to lose a parent." Mahal nodded swiftly in agreement. "Janir and I have agreed that whatever is reducing mental capacity in the elderly will probably not be a factor in the future," Windblossom continued. Mahal thought that over for a moment. He could think of no one still alive near Windblossom's age. His own mother had been only 70 when she died, and his father, Sean, had been 62. He did not need Windblossom to tell him that the harder life on Pern would mean reduced life expectancies. He sought a new subject. "What happens after you, Windblossom?" "In the Eridani way, there should be others for the succeeding generations." "Do you mean Amora and Tyron? That smacks of slavery, to expect them to continue blindly in the tradition." "It is more of a genetic destiny," Windblossom said. The look in her eyes made Mahal realize that she herself was an example of that genetic destiny. The Eridani way involves a discipline transcending generations and millennia, a dedication to the good of the ecosystem. I can appreciate their goals, but I don't like their methods, Mahal replied. Windblossom nodded. Neither do I. And I have better reason than most to appreciate their goals and question their methods. In fact, if we were in contact with the EEC, I'd have some comments to make to the Eridani Council itself. Mahal's eyebrows rose as he considered the image of this tiny old lady berating the prestigious Eridani Council. He imagined the Eridani Council would soon see the error of its ways. "What would your comments be?" he asked, his eyes dancing humorously. "I would say that I consider it a mistake to engage an aristocracy in maintaining ecologies, that it should be something that is the inheritance of every sentient being living in the ecosystem." "I see. And how would you implement that here, on Pern?" He also knew that the casualties in those threadfalls had been much higher than when more of the Weir's strength was available. Well, it can't be helped, he told himself. Gaminth, give the order to go between to Nerat Tip. With the lush green of Lower Bendon below them and clear skies above, Matal surveyed the arrayed wings approvingly as they awaited the coming of Thread. He had 3 wings arranged as one flight flying high, with a second flight behind and lower. The 16 spare dragons were arranged in a short wing, trailing behind the lower flight, but ready to fill in any gaps either as individual dragons or as a full wing. Matal squinted, scanning the sky above him for signs of Thread. Wouldn't it just be too much if Thread failed to fall, he mused sourly. A dragon's roar alerted him. There, faintly, like a blur on the sky above, he saw it. As one, the dragons of Bendon turned to their riders for Firestone. As one, the riders fed them the flame-bearing rock, and as one, the dragons chewed the rock, digesting it deep in their second stomachs. As one, the Weir rose to flame Thread. And then, behind him, dragons bugled a strange challenge. Matal turned in surprise to find the source of their bafflement. "What is she doing?" Matal bellowed in outrage. Far below and behind him, he spied the large wings of Bendon's only mature queen dragon. "Thread!" Gaminth warned, but it was too late. A stream of fire seared across Matal's cheek and onto his chest before the nothing of between brought blessed relief from the agony of Threadscore. Matal clawed off the frozen thread, and then they were back in daylight again. "Gaminth, tell her to return to the Weir," Matal ordered. "Minith says that Talia says it is her duty to be here at Threadfall," Gaminth informed him. Matal's rage grew as he watched the flying formations behind him dissolve and grow unmanaged, with some bronzes striving to protect their queen. "Order the short wing to protect her," Matal said, "and have the rest of the wings reform." His orders had little effect on the chaos behind him. Grimly, Matal wondered if it had been a wise idea to put his wing in the forefront. It had seemed a good choice to lead from the front, but he hadn't counted on not being able to handle the confusion behind him. He hadn't expected this sort of confusion. "Tell Minith that I order her back to the Weir," Matal said to his dragon. "She is too near her mating flight to risk Threadscore now." "Minith says to tell you that Talia is only doing her duty," Gaminth relayed apologetically. "Talk to Lorana!" Matal shouted out loud. "Have her explain it to Minith." Behind him, Matal could hear dragons shrieking in pain as Thread struck them. "It didn't have to be this way," he thought furiously. "I'm honored," he said finally. "Don't be. You're a good rider. You're good enough to know it, too. I'd be asking you to lead a fall soon enough, even if—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "Even if Selena were still a werewoman." Matal looked back to Catan. "That's why I want to know what you think our strength will be. It will be hard enough for Benik to lead a fall the first time, even with everything under control. It wouldn't be fair to ask him to lead one without giving him some idea of the number of dragons he'll be leading." Catan nodded in understanding, then closed his eyes in thought. When he looked up moments later, his face was clouded. "The trouble is, I can't really give you a decent guess, Matal," he said. We don't know how many dragons were lost between because they had the sickness but didn't tell us or didn't realize it themselves." Before anyone could comment, he continued, "All the same, if you look at the first sicknesses and losses, we've lost 73 dragons. Not all of them to the sickness, but it's the worst number." He waited for Matal to nod. "That's 73 out of 385 fighting dragons, or about 1 in 5 who have either been lost or gotten sick in the past 7 days. So I'd say that you could possibly expect the same ratio in the next 7 days. He raised a cautioning hand. "It might get worse, it might get better, but let's say that another 43 dragons will not be able to fly the next fall." Matal nodded, though his face was pale. He looked at Benik. "That would leave you with about 170 dragons. Can you do it?" Benik was just as pale as the weir leader. 43 more dragons," he echoed, aghast. He shuddered, then forced himself to answer Matal. "I'll do my best." "That's all anyone can do," Matal said with a satisfied nod. He stood up and turned to leave. "I'll make the announcement tomorrow morning. After that, I want to leave the training to you." Benik nodded. "I think I'll continue with the exercises you had us doing before the last fall," he said after a moment. Then he grinned. "I don't suppose your wing would mind slinging thread, would it?" "I don't suppose," Matal agreed with a grin and a nod. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it's been a long day." He covered his mouth to stifle a yawn. "And I'm in need of some rest." A voice called him urgently from sleep. "Master Zist! Master Zist!" Master Harper Zist raised his head wearily from his pillow and blearily looked up. He made out the shape of the watch drummer, Terralar, silhouetted by the glows from the hall. When Lorana returned with a tray, Benik deftly took the wine-glass and handed it to Talia, who had grown quieter but no less determined. "I don't care," she said. "You shouldn't fly this fall." "It's my duty, Talia," Benik said. "Besides," he added with a grin, "I want to do it." He grabbed a mug from the tray Lorana had set down and poured himself some claw. "I know you do," Talia snapped. She took a sip of her wine. "It's just that if anything were to happen to you, particularly before Minith rises, She broke off. Benik hastily passed his mug to Kindon and wrapped his arms around Talia, drawing her into a tight embrace. The move caught her off guard, and she tipped her glass, spilling some of the wine onto his tunic. "I'm sorry," she said. She looked at the others, her eyes moist with emotion. "I'm sorry." "It's all right. Come on," Benik said soothingly, leading her from the room. "It's late. You'll feel better in the morning." There was an uncomfortable pause as the others listened to their steps as they walked down the hall back to their weir. "Stress does strange things to people," Selena murmured when their steps had faded away. "She wasn't like this before," Matal muttered, looking puzzled. "She said she's always tired, always edgy," Selena commented. She looked at Kindon. "Could it be something in her diet?" Kindon shrugged. "Catan would know best." He cocked his head toward Lorana, adding, "But Lorana might have some thoughts." Lorana was still digesting the events of the evening. She shook her head. "My father bred herd beasts. Sometimes they would go off their feed for no reason. We could never explain it." "Well, Talia's been off her feed for the past 3 turns now," Kindon commented sardonically. "I think she's just scared," Selena said sympathetically. "And who can blame her? These are very worrying times." Kindon recognized the end of the conversation and picked up the tray. "We need to get back to our work," he said to the others, gesturing for Lorana to precede him. "No, you need to get to sleep," Matal corrected. "I can't have you two acting like Talia." Out of earshot, Kindon turned back to Lorana and said quietly, "Could it be that the dragons are off their feed?" Lorana looked at him questioningly. "Could they be missing some nutrient we aren't aware of? Something that would make them susceptible to this illness?" Lorana shook her head. She started to speak, but it turned into a wide yawn before she could answer. Matal is right, Kindon declared. You do need your sleep. Oh. He placed the tray on the return shaft to the lower caverns, turned back to her with a grin, and raised.
This is disc number 8.
Cleor rolled over and up. In truth, he hadn't slept, and even though he had gone to bed very early in the morning, he had found himself faking sleep so as not to upset Siska. "You were faking last night," she said as she came across the room and kissed him. Cleor groaned. "I didn't want to worry you." "I couldn't sleep either," she admitted. "But it's time. Thread falls over Lower Nabol and Upper Ruatha in less than 2 hours." She gestured toward the bathing room. "Get a good bath. Start the day right." Cleor smiled. If there was any mantra to Siska's high-energy life, it was, get a good bath. It was about the only time he could get her to slow down. Well, one of the only times, he corrected himself with a wicked grin. "I heard that," Siska called from the bathing room. "I didn't say anything," Cleor returned mildly. Siska re-entered the room, grabbed his hand, and tugged him playfully toward the waiting bath. "I heard it anyway." Wisely, Cleor said nothing. As he eased into the bath, he opened his mouth to ask for some breakfast, but Siska shushed him with a raised finger. "I've already sent down for some claw and scones," she informed him. "Eat light up here so that you can eat a hearty breakfast with the riders." Cleor nodded. That had been his plan. He once again blessed his luck that his Rineth had managed to catch Melurth when she rose. He had been so afraid that one of the older, wiser dragons, and his rider, would have managed to outmaneuver the young bronze on his first mating flight. He and Siska had already formed a strong attachment before her gold rose for the first time, and while he understood and accepted the ways of the weir, he was honest enough to admit that he did not want any other dragon man entwined with her. "I know that look," Siska said, returning with a tray. She put it down beside the bathing pool and sat herself beside it. "You're worrying about me again." Cleor could never understand how his thoughts could be so transparent, no matter how hard he worked to keep his face expressionless. "Afraid I might let another ride Melurth, eh?" she teased, punching him lightly on his exposed shoulder. "Well, I will, too, if you don't behave." "I'll do my best," he promised somberly. Siska flicked water at him, grinning. "That's the spirit. Now, finish bathing so we can get downstairs and make a suitable appearance."
"There are 222 fighting dragons, excluding the 3 queens, and they will all fly," Dagon shouted at Vigin and Lena. For the 3rd time since the last fall, they had asked him to keep the sick. Lorana shook her head sadly. "There were so many. Less than the first fall, but still, so many." Matal nodded slowly. "Karayan was right, then, to pity you." Lorana met his eyes. "I'll survive," she said firmly. "It's hard, but I have Arith to comfort me." "If there's anything you need," Matal said, "or anything I or Selena can do to help—" "Thank you," Lorana said, forcing a smile. "We'll manage, Arith and I." But now, as Kindon's eyes scanned the crowded tables, he wondered. With a sigh, he left and headed up to the records room. Perhaps she had decided to eat there instead. He was halfway up the steps when Arith called, "Lorana needs the harper." The dragon's message made him jump, but as soon as he recovered, he was running down the stairs and across the bowl to Lorana's quarters. Kindon slowed as he neared Lorana's rooms, halting just before the door, catching his breath and listening. Through the curtain, he heard the soft sounds of sobbing. "Lorana? May I come in?" "Yes." Kindon pushed the curtain aside. He noticed that the tapestries were covered with drawings pinned to them. They were drawings of dragons and riders. Some he recognized as dragons from the weir, all dragons lost to thread or the sickness. He guessed the other dragons were those lost from other weirs, although he couldn't imagine how Lorana knew enough to draw them. As he peered closer, he saw that she didn't. The characteristic features of a dragon's face,
The shape of its eye ridges, the spacing of the snout, the shape and number of teeth were all left as nebulous, shadowy hints. But he could plainly see their riding harness, the faces of their grief-stricken riders, and Kindon was struck by the amount of pain that he saw in those faces, pain that he knew Lorana must have felt directly. He noticed the light reflected off Aerith's whirling eyes as the dragon looked in worriedly from her lair toward her rider. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw Lorana lying in her bed. He went over and sat on the edge. She was lying on her stomach, face in her pillow, her upper arms and back uncovered. For a moment he sat there, silent. He started to put a hand on her shoulder, paused, and pulled it back. "Do you have any lotion?" "What?" Lorana turned over to face him. In the dim light, Kindon could see her blotchy face and the streaks where tears had washed down her face. He had seen people like this before, worn out with pain, bodies tight with grief and sorrow. "Lotion?" Kindon repeated. "Or scented oil?" "Come along, by all means. Coranth can carry 3. Lorana craned her neck over Benick's shoulders as they spiraled down into Fort Weir's bowl. The watch-dragon's bugle had already challenged them, and Lorana had heard Coranth's response and the watch-dragon's wary greeting. Kindon had been left at the Harper Hall, where Benick had been congratulated and had exchanged brief pleasantries with Master Harper Zist. "We're expected," Benick relayed unnecessarily but politely to Lorana. The Weir leader's attitude during the whole trip puzzled and pleased Lorana, who had been used to his silent obsequity with Talia. The man was displaying depths she had not seen before. Coranth alighted lightly, and then, after dropping off rider and passenger, took to the air again to seek a place on the Weir Heights. "Fort Weir sees the sun 6 hours after we do at Bendon," Benick commented, as he examined the early morning sun rising over them. "Won't we still have to time it on our return?" Lorana asked. "Indeed we will," Benick told her. "Have you ever gone between times?" "Once, with Jetrel." "Were you very tired afterward?" Lorana nodded. "That is the price of going between times," Benick said. "If it weren't for our pressing need, I'd never risk it." He looked as if he were ready to say more, but decided against it. Instead, he scanned the area and noticed a group approaching them. "Here we are." The man in the center of the group was younger than Benick, handsome and wiry. His long hair was tied at the back of his neck, a style uncommon among dragon riders, but the hair was such a honey gold and so wavy that Lorana could well imagine the attraction it would hold for some women. Her eye moved to the woman beside him. Siska was even taller than her Weir leader, a brown-eyed, brown-haired beauty with a strong, cheerful face. She was much more buxom than Lorana, but she carried herself proudly, her stride neither apologetic nor flaunting. "Weir leader Benick, welcome to Fort Weir," Cleor called as he approached the group. Siska added a welcoming smile of her own. "Thank you," Benick replied. "I wish I were coming at a more pleasant time." "As do we all," Siska agreed, her lovely features creasing into a frown. "How bad is it at Bendon?" Benick looked at Lorana. "There are 20 sick dragons at the Weir," Lorana told them. 3 times that number have already gone between. Cleor and Siska exchanged looks. The Weir woman spoke. "We have nearly 60 sick dragons, and have lost over 40. "I'll be lucky, but I wasn't sure in this fog." Mahal recalled from Lacan that Melan had taken over the running of Tilak Hold just recently, after Jim Tilak's successor had passed on. The man was about Mahal's own height, big-boned, brown-haired, and brown-eyed, with a pleasant gentleness in his eyes. "Pleased to meet you," Mahal said. "I think the pleasure is ours," Melan responded, gesturing toward the great hall. "We've got a hearty fish stew waiting and a warm spot for Windblossom for her stay." He peered down at the diminutive old lady, his curiosity obvious. "Although why you would prefer our shores to the warmer ones of southern Bowl?" You have a spot picked out for me on the beach? Windblossom asked. No prying eyes?
Melon nodded, his expression perplexed. We do, and a shelter for all occasions.
I asked for some other things. Were you able to provide them? Windblossom continued.
With pleasure,
Melon said, white teeth flashing bright against the brown beard.
Although I will confess that you've got many people scratching their heads in wonder.
An old lady's folly, Windblossom said. She jerked her hand at the Bend Weir leader. Mahal said I needed a rest. She gestured around at the fog. This will be restful, I think.
You are welcome to whatever we can provide you, Windblossom, Melon told her.
He shook his head, adding,
Although I don't quite know what you'll want with a bell, a coil of rope, and some planking.
It is a science experiment, Windblossom told him. Mahal shot her a penetrating look, but she waved it aside. I wish to see how far sound will travel over foggy water. A clattering sound behind them caused Windblossom to turn around. A watchware approached eagerly, only to be hauled short with a hiss of pain by a stout chain attached to its neck with a collar. What is this? Windblossom asked, her voice going dangerously soft.
One of yours, I think,
Melon said, waving a hand affectionately toward the watchware. Windblossom turned to Tillich's leader and looked up at him with a dangerous intensity. Why is it chained?
Oh, Tilskir was always getting into mischief, Melon said dismissively. It's for its own good.
Watchwares are he or she, Windblossom corrected sternly. This one is a green. That makes her a she.
I'm sorry. She was getting into trouble, Melon said. I apologize if chaining her up distresses you.
More than distress, Windblossom said. She glanced up at Mahal. This is bad.
The pass is over, Mahal protested.
You have to know what you're reading, what it means.
You need a map,
Janir added in agreement. Windblossom pointed to another, smaller device. This is a mapper. When we built the dragons, we had a fully integrated unit, which in turn was integrated with Avis and the Yokohama. Tyron looked confused. Avis, Artificial Intelligence Visual Audio System, Emora translated. A smart computer.
Much more, Janir corrected. And the Yokohama was the largest of the ships that brought our ancestors to Pern.
I've seen them, Tyron said excitedly.
The astronomy students brought a telescope up to the drum tower just before dawn one morning.
He shivered at the memory of the 3 huge starships hovering in orbit above the planet.
The students called them the Dawn Sisters.
Janir turned back to Windblossom.
What are you hoping to do with this equipment?
When she didn't answer, he persisted.
I thought you had said that if the fire lizards came from the future, then obviously your solution had failed.
Windblossom nodded. I am thinking there must be a solution that works.
Wouldn't it just make more sense to leave the equipment for those that need it?
Tyron wondered. It would, Windblossom agreed, if they could learn how to use the equipment in time. 16.
Firestone dry, dragons fly. Firestone wet, riders die.
Bend Weir, 3rd pass, 6th day. Later, AL 508.
Kinden's stomach lurched as Karanth began a sharp descent the moment they came out from between over Bend Weir. Their drop was so steep that Kinden was pitched forward, hard against Lorana, when Karanth suddenly stretched his wings to cup air and slow them for a landing. Even so, the dragon hit the ground with a jolt. Lorana was off and rushing toward her weir before either Benik or Kinden could move. Kinden followed quickly, with Benik not far behind. Catan was waiting for them in Lorana's quarters. Arith's eyes were whirling, and when she saw her rider she gave a happy chirp, which ended in an unmistakable sneeze.
I'm all right, Arith told Lorana over and over as Lorana wrapped her arms around the young dragon's head. I'm all right. No, you're not, Lorana chided her gently. But you will be, I promise. We'll find something. We found something at Fort Weir. She looked up at Catan. "We found something at Fort Weir," she said. Kindon raised his eyebrows in surprise. In their haste to get back to the weir, they had not even spoken. "What?" Catan asked. "The records at Fort say that something was built here, at Bendon."
This is disc number 9.
If anyone knew the Death Watch drill for a rider and a sick dragon, it would be Laurana. She had held the hands of the distraught riders, had uttered all the comforting words she could imagine, and had held the riders in her arms as they collapsed with grief and despair when their dragons went between forever. "Thread falls over Eigenweir soon," Kindon told her bluntly. "Ista will be fighting it." Laurana took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She tilted her head up to look into Kindon's eyes. "Thank you," she told him. "Should I turn on the globes?" he asked, jerking his head toward the nearest glow basket. "More light would help," Laurana agreed. As Kindon busied himself with the task, she followed him around the room with her eyes, partly to distract herself, and partly because he was such a pleasant distraction. He turned back to her when he was done. "May I stay?" Laurana met his gaze with a bittersweet look and patted the ground beside her. "I was hoping you would. The ground's hard, but you don't notice it after a while." Kindon sat beside her, unsure whether to lean against Arith as she was doing, or to offer himself as a support for Laurana, or to lean himself against her. She sensed his unease and turned her back to him, stretching her neck from side to side to get out the kinks. She reached behind her and said to him, "Could you?" Kindon stifled a laugh and began to gently massage her tense shoulder blades and upper back. He took his time and was thorough. Partway through, Laurana gasped, and Arith jerked awake, eyes opening quickly. The little queen keened softly beside her rider, and Kindon didn't need to see Laurana's face to know that she was crying with the pain of dragons forever lost. In the end, Kindon couldn't say who was more distraught, Laurana, Arith, or himself. Through the course of the evening, the length of the fall as it traveled from Eigenweir southwest over the Ista Strait and on to the southern tip of Ista Island, Laurana shuddered as though beaten down by a miner's hammer, and Arith keened, sometimes so often that it almost seemed as if the small dragon was chanting. The pain and anguish that both rider and dragon were suffering hurt Kindon even more because he did not feel it, except through them, and could not anticipate the next loss. All through the long fall he stayed by them, gently massaging Laurana's tense back, softly patting Arith's hide. Kiari or Makala must have come to check on them several times, for Kindon— "The riding harness will need to be oiled first," Catan said, shaking his head again. "It would be better, young queen, if you waited until you had had the harness on for a day or two, so we know that we've got it adjusted right." Arith blew a dejected sigh through her nose, which turned into an open-mouthed cough. Sorry." Kindon and Catan exchanged concerned looks. "Maybe this was a bad idea," Kindon said. "No," Laurana responded emphatically. Beside her, Arith made a similar noise, though quieter, for fear of exasperating her cough. "And I love the bright work, Kindon. It's very well done." "A friend of mine," Kindon told her. "Well, please thank her for me." "Him," Kindon corrected with a grin. "But I'll pass the thanks on." "How's the search going?" she asked, feeling awkward and wanting to change the topic. Seeing the worried looks exchanged by the other two, she regretted the question instantly. "Not well?" "No," Kindon said. "I can't think of anywhere else to look." "That's because you're not weir-bred," Catan said, clapping the harper on the back. "Why don't we talk about it while we check on the injured?" "Arith, I'd like to go with them. Will you stay here?" Laurana asked her dragon out loud so that the others could hear. "Should we take your harness off so you can lie down?" "No," the queen replied, shaking her head so firmly that her body swayed in counterpoint. "And I won't get it dirty, I promise." Laurana laughed and hugged Arith's neck. "Let me know if it itches, or if you need me." "Of course." I won't be long, Lorana promised. Take your time, Arith replied. I'll call you if I need you. Lorana turned to Kindon and Catan. I'll come with you. Lorana appeared distracted while the three of them checked on the injured dragons. Several times Catan had to repeat a question or a request to her before she responded. Kindon noticed that she kept looking around the weir, particularly whenever a dragon sneezed or coughed. Their work took them through the morning, and still they had only checked on half of the 92 injured dragons. I think we should group all the sick dragons, Kindon said as they walked to the next weir. We've been over this, Catan said. How would you do it? Just together, at least, Kindon said. Probably on the lowest level. Why not a high field? Lorana asked. It would be colder up there. It might prevent the spread of the sickness. Or it might speed it up, Catan countered. If the cold makes it harder on the dragon's resistance. But aren't dragons pretty much inured to cold? Kindon asked. I mean, they go between, but only for short periods of time, Lorana admitted. But they do fly where the air is cold, Catan mused. They don't seem to mind. My apologies. The song has me perplexed. But I will respect your orders. He laid a slight emphasis on that word, and returned to more traditional lays. Very well, then, Talia replied. She waved a hand at him imperiously. Continue, Harper. Kindon gave her another half-bow, signaled to his accompanists, and stood to sing in a strong, martial voice. Drummer beat and piper blow, harper strike and soldier go, free the flame and sear the grasses till the dawning red star passes. Go see to Lorana, Matal said to Selena as soon as he was sure that the situation was back under control. Selena found Lorana in Arith's weir, her arms wrapped around her dragon's head. He means me, doesn't he? Lorana asked as Selena entered. She didn't look up at the ex-weirwoman. Her voice was choked with tears. I don't know, Selena answered honestly. But I hope he does. You hope? Lorana asked incredulously, turning to face the weirwoman. How can you? Because that song, if it has anything to do with what's happening to us, how can it? When was it written? Lorana demanded. It's probably just some old Harper song written by someone who had drunk too much. It could be, Selena admitted honestly. And now that you mention it, that makes the most sense. So why did he sing it? Lorana cried angrily. You think it was about you? Don't you? I don't know, Selena told her. You're not a healer, we know that. Lorana shook her head angrily, fingering one of the silver pieces of brightwork on Arith's harness. Do you see this? She asked, pulling the piece off and waving it at Selena. Do you see how it's marked? A healer's mark. Selena gasped, startled. Exactly, Lorana cried, turning back to replace the brightwork on Arith's riding harness. And everyone will know that, too. So what will they think, Selena? What do you imagine? Lorana took a steadying breath and wiped the tears off her cheeks. I think that the riders will believe that I brought this sickness here with me, she said slowly. Selena felt as if she had been struck in the stomach. She slumped down to her knees as the full impact of Lorana's words struck home. If Lorana had brought the sickness, then it was her fault that Breath had died. For a moment Selena felt anger rise up in her, and she knew that her face showed it, even without seeing Lorana's stricken reaction. It would be so much easier, such a relief, if she could blame someone for her loss. But then I heard they'd been banished, Delor said, his tone carefully neutral. Kindon shook his head sadly. I think most of them died before that, anyway. He composed himself and straightened up. Let's get Talia to softer ground, he suggested. The moment her eyes fluttered open again, Talia protested loudly and demanded to go see the old-timer rooms. To Kindon, she sounded as if she wanted revenge on the rooms for causing her embarrassment, but Benick was firm and insisted that someone else go in first once the rooms finished airing. I'll go, Kindon volunteered when they reassembled in the hatching grounds. I will go, Rigellan declared, shaking his head. I've no family, he added by way of explanation.
I'm not so sure that Milena would agree, Daelor said with a grin. But you've earned the right.
He glanced at Benick and Talia.
If that's all right with you, Weir Leader.
Absolutely, Benick replied. In the end, Rigellan was fine. He peered inside the open corridor, blinked several times, purposefully drew great, deep breaths, and then walked through the doorway and out of sight. The rest of the party waited tensely outside until he returned again, his eyes wide. The room is full of the most amazing things, he declared, beckoning them inside. Talia elbowed her way past the others and raced to be second into the rooms. She paused just past the threshold, not so much for fear of bad air, but in amazement at what she saw. Most of the far wall was covered from floor to ceiling with a drawing of several ladder-like columns composed of weird, interconnected, varicolored rods and balls. "Look at this!" Rigellan called out, pointing to the drawing as the others flooded into the room. Talia glanced at the wall drawing, made a hasty scan of the room, and then headed, unerringly, for something glittering on an open shelf at the other end of the room. Kindon entered the room and stared wide-eyed at the drawing. Then a flash of movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention, and he turned just in time to see Talia pocket a small, silvery object. Before he could move to intervene, she was picking something else up from the counter. "What are these?" she asked, holding up a crystal-clear glass vial. She shook it, examining the powder-like substance inside, then casually placed it back on the counter and picked up another. There were 4 vials in all, Kindon noticed. The countertop bore not only dust-free spots where the vials had been placed. Each clear spot was centered over a colored mark, red, green, blue, and yellow. His eyes widened as Talia negligently put the 4th vial back on the countertop, well away from any of the... "Arith, there may be a cure," Laurana told her dragon. "There are 4 vials here. I think one of them has the cure." "Which one?" Arith asked. Which one, indeed? Laurana asked herself. She could try all 4 one at a time, but how long would she have to wait between each dose to know if it worked? Would Arith have enough time to wait between each dose? How could she decide? Laurana swallowed and shook her head fiercely. This was not a decision she could make alone. There was more than her life involved. Maybe we should wait, Laurana thought. No, Arith responded, and Laurana could feel her dragon's sense of foreboding, her sense of despair. I think we should do it now. Which one? Laurana asked her. All of them, Arith responded. If the others are wrong, they won't hurt, will they? I don't know, Laurana told her truthfully. Let's try just a little of each, then, Arith replied. The young gold gave a mental chuckle. You know, you can hear all the dragons. I think I can hear more of your thinking than other dragons can. There's no time to try them one at a time, is there? No, Laurana replied, pulling out one of the syringes. There isn't any time. I'll meet you at the entrance to the hatching grounds, Arith told her. Laurana searched through the cabinet, found an empty, sealed beaker, and opened it. Nervously, she turned to the 4 larger beakers. How much of each? Less than for a full-grown dragon, because Arith was not full-grown, Laurana guessed, but how much? There were 5 needles, she reasoned, so perhaps each held enough for a full dose. She would need half that much for Arith. Benick was shoved roughly awake. He tried to squirm away from his tormentor, but the shaking continued. Get up! Talia shouted in his ear. What is it? Benick asked blearily. He turned on his side, facing Talia, his eyes blinking furiously as he tried to see in the dim light. I need to talk to you. Can't it wait until daylight? Of course not. It's about Laurana. What about her? I don't want her going to the old-timer room. She's to be kept away. Why? For her own good, Talia snapped back. Her eyes darted to her dressing table. Bennick's sleep-muddled mind recalled that she had been playing with something silver and small before she had gone to bed. He didn't recall her having a silver brooch or jewelry box. "What harm could she get into?" he replied, sitting upright. "I don't—"
This is disc number 10.
As the first Agent 03 hissed over the young dragon's corpse, Tyron rushed forward, his belt knife in his hand. "Tyron!" Windblossom shouted, her voice merging with Amora's at her side. "What are you doing?" Quickly, Tyron cut a part of the dragon's riding harness, tore off a silver buckle, and retreated toward the others. He nodded curtly at one of the groups carrying a barrel of Agent 03 and, jaw clenched against the pane, plunged his hands into the acid. "What are you doing?" Windblossom shouted again. "It's all right," Tyron said, showing her his hands. They were pitted and raw from where the acid had burned through the oils of his skin. He waved the piece of metal at them. "This will tell us whose dragon this is." He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes as the pain from his hands burned through the adrenaline that had carried through his wild act. "Besides," he added, gasping in pain, "it doesn't hurt as much as werebite." When the cold gray light of morning finally broke through the scattering clouds, Windblossom was still hunched beside the steaming remains of the dragon. The Agent 03 had eaten all its flesh and left only bleached bone. As each barrel of the nitric acid had burned another layer of flesh and muscle away from the dead dragon, Windblossom had felt herself similarly stripped, her emotions laid open and raw to her as they never had been before. The stream of green mucus that had been forced from the dragon's nostrils on its impact with the ground had made it crystal clear to Windblossom that the dragon had been infected with the same illness as the two fire lizards. Over and over again her mind replayed the instant when she had known that she had to go outside, that something was coming. Over and over her memory showed her the images of the dragon appearing, faintly, high in the sky, and falling uncontrollably to the ground. Dead. The sickening sound of the dragon's body hitting the ground still made her shudder. Again she replayed the memory in her mind, fighting with herself to slow it down, to bring every detail into sharp relief. She sighed angrily as she once again failed to determine the precise feeling she had the instant she had known she had to go outside. She had felt it before, when the fire lizards had appeared, some connection, something. Bitterly, Windblossom shook her head to rid herself of the problem. There were other problems. She expected Mahal, and maybe even Taurine, to arrive presently. She wouldn't be surprised if every dragon on Pern arrived. She had started workmen digging a grave large enough for the skeletal remains of the— "I'll call you when you're needed." With a worried look toward Lorana, Talara retreated from Talia's anger. "It's not like she needs a whole guard," Talia muttered to herself as she heard Talara's feet hasten down the corridor. "Probably going to tell Mikala. Well, let her. I'm the weirwoman. Not even Selena can criticize me." She looked down at Lorana, lying on her back, motionless in her bed. "I tried to keep you away," Talia said, almost apologetically. "But you had to do it your way. Wouldn't tell anyone. The first we hear is you and your dragon shrieking in the middle of the night." Her voice rose as her anger grew. "You didn't deserve that dragon, you know. You were so sure, so certain, so willing to risk everything. You deserved to lose her, do you hear? You deserved it!" Talia realized that she was shouting at the top of her lungs into Lorana's ear and pulled back, both appalled at her own behavior and amazed by Lorana's unresponsiveness. "You can't die. Selena was with her breath for 10 times more turns than you had months with your dragon, and she didn't die. You can't die. You're not allowed. Do you hear me? It wouldn't be right. You're not allowed. You're not—" Talia found herself on her knees at Lorana's bedside, cradling the woman's head in her arms, her tears falling onto Lorana's hair like rain. "Please, don't die. Please." For all his fort rider's work, Cleor was certain that some thread had fallen through to the ground in the night fall over Southern Bowl. He shuddered at the thought of what the ground might look like in the morning. "Take us to the hold, Rineth," Cleor said. "I must speak with the Lord Holder." Contrary to Cleor's fears, Lord Egremer was effusive with his praise of the dragons and their riders.
"We'll have ground crews out at first light, I promise,"
Egremer said. He looked nervously northward, toward where Thread had fallen. "How bad is it, do you suppose?" Cleor shook his head. "We did our best, but the warm weather meant that every thread was alive. The watchwares were overwhelmed, and we had never trained with them, so our coordination was lousy." Lady Ivala's eyes grew wide with alarm. "We'll have sweep riders out at first light," Cleor promised. "As soon as we see anything, we'll let you know." "I'd hate to lose the stands of timber to the north," Lord Egremer said. "They're old enough to be harvested, but I was hoping to hold off until mid-pass, when we'll really be needing the wood." Cleor nodded. "We'll do our best." "And we're grateful for all that you've done," Egremer replied. Wearily, Cleor mounted Rineth and gave him the image for 4. Catan wondered how much of Drith's conviction was simply a reflection of Catan's own beliefs. "We will find it," he promised his dragon. "Lorana will recover soon, and we'll find it. Rest up, old friend." In the distance, Catan could hear Drith's answering rumble turn into another long, raspy cough. Catan shot out of his chair and headed for the door. "I'm coming, Drith." "No," Drith responded. "I must do this now while I still can." "No!" Catan shouted, both out loud and in his mind. "I will always love you," Drith told him fondly, and then he was gone. "No!" Catan shouted again, reaching with his mind to follow Drith. He jerked as he felt another presence join him, searching in the darkness of between for the brown dragon. Together they roamed, searching all that they could find, but there was no sign of Drith. Gasping for breath, Catan found himself once again feeling his body. "Drith, no! Come back!" Lorana cried in unison with him. Across the room, Kitan locked tear-soaked eyes with Lorana. "I tried," Lorana called to him, struggling to get out of her bed. "I tried, Kitan, but he fought me. He wouldn't come back." Kitan stumbled back to Lorana's bedside. "I'm sorry," she said, shaking her head. "I tried." Kitan grabbed one of her hands and stroked it comfortingly, his need to reassure her overcoming his own grief. "I know, lass, I know. I felt you there with me." He closed his eyes and reached once more for his beloved Drith. Nothing. For a long moment, Kitan wished he could follow his dragon, realized he would have ridden Drith on that last journey between if he had had the chance. With a chilling shock, Kitan realized that Drith had known that too. "We must end this." Lorana's hand tightened on his, and the ex-dragon rider opened his eyes again to see a look of fierce determination in her red-rimmed brown eyes. "We will end this," she promised. 19. Symbiont, a life form that lives in harmony with its host, often performing valuable functions for the host, e.g., E. coli in the human gut. College, first interval, AL 58. Tyron spotted Mahal and Brianth circling through the clouds above and sent Gren up to them. "I don't think it is advisable." Mahal gestured for her to enlighten them. "You have observed that there is a great deal of physical stress associated with traveling between, particularly between times. I do not think that I could handle such a prolonged strain," Windblossom said. She glanced apologetically at Amora and Tyron before adding, "And while I don't doubt their efforts, I believe that neither Tyron nor Amora would be up to the scientific challenge." She paused to give Tyron and Amora a chance to demur. When they remained silent, she went on. Also, there is the fact that the equipment and knowledge base we need are here, now at the college, and may not be available for centuries in the future. Mahal stroked his chin, nodding.
Even with what the dragons could carry, I imagine there could always be one important thing that would be left behind.
And it would be a one-way trip, Tyron pointed out. The others looked at him. We couldn't risk accidentally bringing the illness back in time with us. Mendon threw up his hands, leaning forward again in his chair.
So, it's impossible, then.
He turned to the other holders. I think we should move on to the next agenda item, the disposition of the remaining stonecutters. I believe that I have the agenda, Emora said blandly. Mendon flushed, and then gestured angrily at her to proceed. The fact remains that there are signs of genetic manipulation, Windblossom spoke out. If we believe that our descendants could not have done this unaided, and we agree that we cannot journey forward in time to aid them, then it is clear that we must indeed have already chosen, a third course. Mendon glared at the old geneticist and only brought his emotions under control by firm exertion of will.
With all due respect, he said,
though none could be heard in his tone.
Did you not say that your results were preliminary?
Windblossom nodded.
And you conducted these tests yourself?
Again, Windblossom nodded.
It is a fact that you are the oldest person now living on Pern, Mendon noted. Could it be possible that you were mistaken?
Roland, Southern Bull's Lord Holder, who had been puzzling something silently, suddenly piped up. How did you figure this out? I thought we had lost all our technology. We did, Windblossom agreed. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat as though recollection pained her. Many of our finest instruments were lost in a storm when we... Benick shook his head. We haven't had time to talk until now. And you shouldn't be talking, you should be eating, Talia quipped, seating herself beside him. With a glare at Lorana, she urged Benick to eat his dinner. How was the fall? Benick found himself with a mouth full at her urging, desperately trying to swallow in order to answer her question. Matal took pity on him.
The fall was not bad, and was well flown.
He nodded to Benick.
We lost 7, all the same, and another 18 were injured.
There are only 5 wings fit to fly, Benick added. It won't be long, Kindon murmured to himself. Talia heard him all the same. It won't be long before what, Harper? She demanded. Kindon shifted uneasily in his seat. It won't be long before there will be no dragons to fight, Thread, he told her softly. He turned to Benick. Which is why I think it's vital to get the miners back, to find a way beyond that second door in the old-timer room, or another way into wherever that door goes. And kill more dragons? Talia asked scornfully. She gestured to Lorana. Would you have more people sacrifice their loves and sanity? Would you lose all the dragons of Pern? Lorana asked in response. Talia stared at her. We cannot say what lies beyond those doors, Lorana told the group. But if we don't find out, we will have denied ourselves any chance of curing the dragons. How do you know? Talia protested. I don't. But think about it. Those rooms were built for a reason. They were built with old-timer skills. To what purpose? To create the dragons, Talia replied, waving her hand dismissively. Everyone knows that the old-timers created them from the fire lizards. But they created them in the southern continent and fled north, Kindon remarked. These rooms would not be where they made the dragons. In fact, since Bandon was the second Weir founded, these rooms would not have been made until long after our ancestors moved north. Matal, Jatal, and Benick looked thoughtful. All the miners' hammering will disturb Minith, Talia protested. I won't permit that. She's not ready to lay her clutch yet, Khitan observed. If the noise bothers her, you could move the Queen's quarters to the northern side of the bowl. There's a nice set of quarters with a connection into the hatching grounds that might prove useful for when you want to visit." Talia looked momentarily interested in the proposition, then brushed it aside. "What makes you so sure that these rooms have the cure?" she demanded of Lorana. "I don't know," Lorana replied honestly. She chewed her lip hesitantly, then glanced at Kindon. "Although if that—"
This is disc number 11.
Gelantir peered and could see a group of Bendon riders with a bronze in the lead. He waved back to Matal just before the Bendon riders went between to return to Bendon Weir. The number of Bendon dragons looked terribly small.
"You've the greater number," Gelantir called, turning back to Cleor. "Would you lead the fall?"
Cleor inclined his head gracefully.
"It shall be my honor."
He relayed his orders to the riders of the combined weirs. As one, dragons turned their heads to their riders, and riders fed them firestone. As one, the fighting dragons of Ista and Fort Weir rose to defeat the deadly thread. "Have Matal give the coordinates back to the Weir," Benik told a coughing, exhausted Karanth. "I think that is wise," the dragon agreed. "Gaminth says that Matal asks if you're all right. I told him it was me. He said to be careful and asked if we should just fly straight back." "Perhaps," Benik said out loud, patting Karanth's neck fondly. "Are you up for it?" Another cough racked Karanth. "I think I would be better going between." Another cough, and a cloud of green ooze engulfed Benik. "I don't want to fly right now." Benik thought furiously. If they went between and Karanth got lost, then they would be lost together. But if they flew straight back, Karanth might get even worse from the extra strain. "Very well," Benik told his dragon. "We'll follow Gaminth." "Lorana says that she'll be waiting," Karanth told him. "She asked," the dragon volunteered before Benik could upbraid him. "She says you'll have to tell Talia." Benik closed his eyes tightly at the thought. "Take this to Karanth as soon as they land," Lorana said, pointing out the line of steaming buckets to the Weirlings. There were only 2 injured dragons, and both had minor injuries. On the other hand, 2 dragons had not returned from the fall, and 11 more were coughing with the sickness. "Make sure that Benik gets him to drink them all, no matter how awful it tastes."
"Latest concoction?"
Kindon asked, striding up to her from his conference with Daelor above the record room. Lorana grimaced. "It's the same old concoction," she admitted, "only I added more menthol to ease their breathing. And a bit of coloring." Kindon quirked an eyebrow. "Well, sometimes just thinking that something's going to work can make all the difference," she explained forlornly. Kindon patted her comfortably. "They're doing well," Kindon replied. "Daelor tells me that he thinks the same thing happened on the upper passage as on the lower. If he's right and it's just a rock slide, they won't have more than a spear length of rock to remove." "So another day or 2? "Yes, about that. That will be just about when Khitan and the Weirlings return." "Right in time for the fall over Nerat," Kindon agreed. A Weirling approached Lorana, wiping sweat out of his eye and giving her a questioning, if hopeful, look. Lorana smiled at him. "No, that's the last of it, Janor." She gestured for him to rejoin the Weirling Master, and then jerked her head at Kindon, inviting him to follow her out of the supply cavern and up into the bowl. The part of the bowl nearest the supply cavern was busy but organized. Pagol, the Weirling Master, had taken charge, delegating some work to Khitan and the more able of the injured Dragonriders. He, Benik, and Matal were conferring together. "Now," Benik was saying to Pagol as Lorana and Kindon approached, "you'll take care to return precisely in 2 days' time, just before dusk." "That's cutting things tight, isn't it?" Pagol asked. "It can't be helped," Benik replied. "I don't want you or any of the others coming back too soon. I'd hate for you to meet yourselves coming or going, and the Weirlings—" "Won't be Weirlings when we get back," Pagol observed. "That's true," Bennick replied. "And I'm sure they'll be well trained in all the recognition points. But just as I expect them to be trained, I expect them not to be trained in timing, or else one of them will try it on their own before they're ready." "There is that," Pagol admitted. "Good man," Bennick replied, smiling and clapping the dour-wheeling master on the back. "It'll be 3 turns for you, but only 2 days for us." Pagol nodded. "I just wish that we knew more of what to expect when we go back in time." "Reneth reports that it doesn't bother the dragons at all," Lorana said, inserting herself into the conversation with an apologetic look at Bennick. "But the riders are all confused and get very irritable." Matal nodded, then stopped, looking thoughtful. "Is there something you want to add, Matal?" Bennick asked. "Huh?" Matal roused himself, then shook his head. No, just an odd thought that crossed my mind." For a moment, Bennick considered whether to press Matal for details, but then he decided against it. He turned back to Pagol. "Well, I envy you the peace and relaxation you'll have with those weirlings," he said to the older dragon rider, eliciting a humorous snort from all around. "I'll try to remember that, Weir Leader, when I'm relaxing." "The Lord Holders have been on to me about the stonecutters," Seamus began with no preamble. "It occurs to me that you might want them yourself for this project." "It didn't seem clear to me that this project has been approved," Amora remarked. Seamus glanced at Mahal for confirmation. Mahal laughed. "My little brother is making his feelings on the notion quite clear." Tyron looked thoughtfully at the two of them. "You mean, where Bendon leads, who will fail to follow?" "Only when Bendon is right," Seamus added in his soft, deep voice. He gave Tyron a frank look. "It's a risky proposition, but—" "Our parents thrived on similar risky propositions," Mahal finished. "The dragons," Tyron guessed. "So it seems fair that we should entrust their deliverance to the same family that has guarded them so well," Amora said, with a nod toward Mahal. "It's not that," Seamus demurred. "Bendon makes more sense." At the other's questioning looks, the big engineer explained, "I've looked over the survey maps of the Weir. There aren't many places to hide a new structure, but there is one good place, except—" "What?" Mahal prompted. "It is situated near a fault line," Seamus replied. "I can almost guarantee that the rooms will be cut off from the Weir by a rockslide within the century." He winked at them and added conspiratorially, "Or sooner, if need be." "But why—" Amora began. "Oh!" Tyron interrupted. "I see." He turned to Amora. "We build the rooms and then cut them off from the rest of the Weir so that no one will disturb them until they're needed." "But how will anyone know about them?" Amora asked. Tyron shrugged. "So you'd be wanting the stonecutters, then?" Seamus asked. He looked at each of them in turn, then added, "Because if you do, you'll have to fight Mendon to get them." Mendon consoled himself that he still had 2 of the stonecutters, and that possession was 9/10 of the law. All he needed was to find sufficiently trained personnel to use them, and quickly. He could see himself apologizing oh so obsequiously to the Weir leaders. "Oh, I am sorry. If only I'd known beforehand that you wanted them." Yes, that apology would do nicely, Mendon decided. He was about to call over one of his minions when he was distracted by a commotion at the door. It was his oldest son, Lyros, whom Mendon had left to mind the hold. "Stonecutters are gone," Lyros whispered when they were seated and the others in the room had returned to their own conversations. "Dragon riders from Bendon Weir took them." For a moment, blind fury coursed through Mendon's veins. "How dare they!" "Didn't you say to call it PNA?" "PNA, then, is harder to separate, means that mutations in the PNA are less likely than in terrestrial DNA," Tyron said. He looked at Windblossom and asked, "Is that why you think there haven't been any illnesses? Because PNA is so much less prone to mutations than DNA?" "It is just as prone," Windblossom corrected. "However, the rate is slower." Tyron waved away the correction as meaningless. "There is a big difference. Windblossom persisted. It means that over time, PNA will have mutations. It still means that in the same period of time there will be more mutations in DNA than in PNA, Amora said, coming to Tyron's defense. That's not all, Tyron said. The very resistance to change means that PNA is less able to deal with unwanted mutations. Oh, I think PNA deals with mutations quite admirably, Windblossom said dryly. Amora looked to Tyron for enlightenment. He shrugged. She means that most mutations will be fatal immediately. And PNA is the same for everything, Pernese? Amora asked. At Tyron's nod, she mused. So whatever is affecting the fire lizards and dragons in the future could be as simple as a symbiont that's mutated into a parasite? It could be, Windblossom agreed. But how does that alter our problem? Amora asked. Regardless of the origin, we have to teach our descendants how to effect a cure. And you will undertake to teach our distant descendants how to use the mapper? Windblossom asked. Of course, Amora said, but I'll need Tyron. I shall need Tyron, Windblossom countered. We'll share, Amora said as a compromise. Agreed, Windblossom said, with a faint, triumphant light in her dark eyes. Tyron looked from mother to daughter and back again and wisely kept his silence. Tyron and Amora stood on either side of a blackboard with identical expressions. They had managed to fill the blackboard twice with just the highlights of the materials they had to cover. If this were a lecture, how long do you think it would take? Amora asked Tyron. The young man frowned thoughtfully before shaking his head. I don't know. Perhaps more important is how long they can afford to sit still just learning. What? Are you afraid that they'll race ahead and start using the materials before they properly know how? Wouldn't you, in their situation? We'll have to come up with a way to slow them down then, Amora said. Some sort of test, a hurdle they have to pass before they can move on. Tyron pursed, and as she did so, she realized that Talara and Chiari had outdone themselves in making the sweet rolls. They were pungent, sometimes spicy, with thin slices of wary meat, some sauce that Lorana didn't recognize, and thin sliced vegetables artfully mixed in. Some were cold and others were hot, and altogether they were more of a meal than a snack. When they were all full and the sweet rolls gone, Talara bustled Chiari into collecting the used plates back onto the trays. We'll leave the claw here for you, Talara said. It won't get cold for a while. I've put a warmer over it. And with that, she headed back to the kitchens, Chiari in tow. By evening, they had made far more progress, but it was not enough for Lorana. We're still no nearer to figuring out how to open that door, she said, jabbing her finger toward the poem-decorated door on the far wall of the classroom. And we've no better idea how to save the dragons. I'm not so sure about that, Khitan disagreed. We know that dragons, like fire lizards, have natural defenses against disease. So? Lorana demanded. And we know that this disease overwhelms those natural defenses. That's all we do know, Kindon snapped, sharing Lorana's disappointment and anger. And we know about PNA, and how it contains the codes for all the vital operations of the dragons and all Pernese life forms, Khitan continued. I think that's more than enough to learn in one day. I agree, Matol announced. My brain is feeling quite ruffled with all this. I'll be glad to have a night's sleep in which to settle and soothe myself. Despite herself, Lorana chuckled in appreciation. Very well, Kindon conceded. I suppose we could do with a rest. We'll be back before dawn, Lorana added firmly. At dawn, Matol corrected, and after breakfast. The next morning they met in the kitchen cavern for breakfast. Matol noticed how the Dragonriders politely avoided them, and how the cooks, Chiari in particular, went out of their way to be sure that they ate a good meal. Kindon, what are you doing? Khitan asked as he downed his second mug of claw. Matol and Selena smiled at each other. They, too, had noticed the Harpers tapping on the table, But it was a well-known fact that the Weir's healer always required 2 mugs of claw to wake up in the morning. Oh, sorry, Kindon said absently, dropping his hands to his lap. A moment later, one was up again as he took another mouthful of oatmeal. Shortly after that, both of Kindon's hands were on the tabletop again, tapping softly. Lorana gave him a look, but shook her head.
Kin,
Khitan began, but Selena...
This is disc number 12.
Karem glanced up at Kaloth as the bronze dragon landed and his rider slid to the ground. As Dagon strode toward him, the healer carefully schooled the frown off his face.
Kaloth's cough sounds worse, Karem commented as soon as Dagon was within hearing. I had hoped that the last herbal would have helped. It didn't, obviously, Dagon replied sourly.
We're leader, Karem began hesitantly, trying to choose his words carefully. Perhaps it would be best if Kaloth rested today.
What? Deny him the chance to lead the full weir? Dagon cut him off loudly. No. Just because your fardled medicines don't work doesn't mean that my dragon can't fly when threat is in the sky.
With a pleading look, Karem came closer to the irate weir leader. Dagon, he's sick. He needs rest.
Find a cure, healer, Dagon ordered, turning back. Find a cure after we fight this fall.
As Dagon returned to mount his dragon, his son, Delin, approached him eagerly. The Whirling Master says Eseth is ready, father, Delin called. Which wing should we fly with?
Dagon shook his head immediately. No, you're not flying fall today.
Delin's face fell. But, father...
Next time, Delin, Dagon told him brusquely. Today I want you here, ready to ferry Firestone and be a messenger.
Yes, father, Delin replied woodenly, and turned away, shoulders slumped toward his dragon. For a moment Dagon thought of calling his son back, of telling him how proud he was and how much he loved him, but then he shook the notion off, reminding himself that the boy had to learn to handle disappointment with discipline. As far as Dagon was concerned, Delin was a dragon rider first, and son second. As the sun crested the heights of Bendon Weir, it illuminated a bowl already bustling with activity. The younger Weirlings, who had not timed it, were busily bagging Firestone and building piles of supplies. Dragon riders, up early and already well fed, were checking riding gear or were gathered in knots talking tactics with their wing leaders. In a corner not far from the living cavern, Khitan and Lorana were setting out supplies and organizing for the inevitable injuries that occurred fighting Thread. Karanth peered down morosely from his weir over the proceedings, occasionally joining the cacophony of dragon coughs, which echoed eerily around the bowl. Minith's worried croons to her mate were answered by soothing noises from Karanth, which fooled no one. Matal and Benik, "She must come back," Selena rasped. "She can talk to all the dragons. She can bring them back." "How?" Kindon asked. But Selena had moved beside him and grabbed Lorana. With palm wide open, she slapped Lorana's face. "Lorana! Lorana, you must come back! Come back now!" Selena begged. She swung for another slap just as Lorana's eyes fluttered open, and she raised a hand feebly to ward off the blow. "Call them back, Lorana! Bring them back!" "I can't," Lorana said, her voice choking on tears. "I tried that with Elrith, and it didn't work." "You must, Lorana," Selena said fiercely. "You must! Call all the dragons of Pern. Bring them back!" Lorana took a deep, steadying breath, glanced at the old weir woman, and nodded slowly. She closed her eyes and reached out, as she had done before when Erith had gone between. This time, however, she stretched beyond the confines of the weir, reaching first to Gaminth, then to all the dragons of Bendon, and then beyond, to Ista, to Fort, and to High Reaches. There were not enough dragons at High Reaches, and she found herself feeling a strange echo. It reminded her somewhat of the echoes she had felt before, but that other echo had had a feeling of old about it. This one didn't. Mentally, Lorana shook the strangeness aside, desperate to find Nineth, Caranth, and the dragons of Telgar. She searched, forcing all the dragons of Pern to follow her will, to search with her. They were willing accomplices. She felt the presence of Bidenth, the senior queen at Ista, and suddenly all the dragons of Ista were behind her, aligned with the direction of her mind. And then she felt Melurth, the queen of Fort Weir, and again the strength of dragons merged with her. For a moment Lorana felt as though she were exploding, being stretched beyond all imagining. She fought a moment of panic, won, and redirected her efforts back to Nineth. There! She found a faint echo, a spark of the queen dragon, and beside it she felt Caranth. She tugged at them, battling them, willing them to obey her, and ruthlessly channeling the power of all the dragons of Pern to her aid. She could feel Caranth resist, try to slide away from her. She fastened onto him tightly and pulled against him, pulling him back to here. She felt his resistance crumble, felt a shadow of Benik as he, too, added a call to his dragon. Relieved, Lorana allowed her mind for just an instant to range further, searching for the dragons of Telgar. She felt a faint echo, a response, and turned all her power toward it, compelling Nineth to order the dragons. We'll have one for the lectures, one for lab work, and the final one for constructing the cure. How big do you need the rooms to be? Seamus asked, pulling on his chin thoughtfully. Emora and Tyron exchanged looks. How many people, would you say? Mahal asked them. I doubt more than 15, Emora said. Any more would be too many. 15's a lot, Tyron said dubiously. He pursed his lips for a moment and then nodded. 15's the upper limit, then. No one's used the stonecutters in a decade, Seamus said, temporizing his answer. But all the same, I think we can do that. Excellent, Mahal replied, clapping his younger brother on the shoulder. When can you start? Those doors? Tyron interjected suddenly. Can you control when they open? Seamus frowned. I could, but there's always the danger that the controls would freeze, he replied warily. Why do you ask? I don't think it's a good idea to let our students into the lab or the workroom until they know what they're doing, Tyron replied. So you want some way to test them before they get in? Emora asked. Tyron nodded. Exactly. Well, we know what to use for the key to the lab, Emora said. What? The others asked in chorus. Air, Emora replied. The only one who should know that answer will be our Queen Rider. Ex-Queen Rider, Taurine corrected sadly. Mahal met her eyes, and they both shuddered in sympathy for that future rider. She must be quite something, Seamus agreed. We can't let her down, Emora declared. She turned to Tyron. Let's get to work. 24. It's all that I can give you to save both Weir and Hold. It's little I can offer you, who paid with dragon gold. Upper Crom Hold, 3rd Pass, 28th Day, AL 508. The sun was well past noon, but the air above Upper Crom Hold was cold, with winter winds blowing from the mountains to the north. Thin wisps of cloud were visible high up in the sky. A moment later, the wisps of cloud were smeared with other shapes. The shapes slowly resolved themselves as they descended. Thread. The air was not so cold that Thread froze. Slowly, silently, Thread streamed from the sky, floating on the winds and down toward the unsuspecting ground below. Once there, I think we could all do with a night's sleep, given the day's events, Selena said. She quelled Lorana's rebellion with an admonishing look. We'll start again first thing in the morning. The next morning, Selena was not surprised to find Lorana already in the learning rooms, engrossed in her studies. Selena placed the tray she had brought with her on the countertop, far from the microscope and Lorana's work, carefully poured a mug of claw, and deftly interposed it in Lorana's hand when the younger woman absently searched for a pencil. Lorana gave a squeak of surprise and looked up from the microscope to smile sheepishly at Selina. "Where's Kindon?" Selina asked, taking the sketchbook from Lorana and looking it over. "He was asleep when I left him," Lorana replied. Selina noticed that there was another, smaller piece of equipment on the table beside the microscope. "What's that?" she asked. "This is a sequencer," Lorana said. "I've managed to confirm the presence of several likely bacteria." She made a face. "I think in the old days they would have used something else instead of the sequencer to identify bacteria." "Perhaps that's all they had left," Selina suggested, eyeing the small device carefully. "It looks sturdy enough, just small, a bit smaller than her jewelry case." "That's what I thought, too," Lorana agreed. Her frown deepened. Selina gave her a questioning look. In answer, Lorana said, "It's just that if this is all they had left, will it be sufficient?" The little unit chimed softly, and Selina noticed that a yellow light had gone out to be replaced by a green light. Lorana peered down at the top of the unit and grinned. "The sequencer has located a common gene among the bacteria it sampled." "What's that mean?" "In this case, I programmed the sequencer to look for a common gene sequence that we could use to prevent the bacterial infection," Lorana replied. She held up a textbook, gestured to the middle cabinet, which was now open and stocked full of books, and then said, "This book here showed me how to do it." "So we have a cure?" Binnick asked. Lorana turned to see the Weir leader standing in the doorway. Lorana hesitated before replying. "I can't say for certain. It looks promising, but I haven't tried to work out how to build the defense into the dragons." Binnick gave her a puzzled look. Before Lorana could draw breath to explain, Matol, Kindon, and Khitan arrived. "Did we miss something?" Matol asked. "Lorana's found a cure," Binnick said, barely restraining his excitement. "Perhaps we should all get comfortable and let Lorana tell this once. If she hasn't clutched already, then the immunity would be passed on to her eggs." "She can't have clutched yet," Matol replied. "We would have known. Talia must have had a bad dream." "What would happen, though, if the cure didn't work?" Khitan asked. "She'd be no better off than she is," Kindon said. "Possibly worse," Lorana corrected. She met Khitan's eyes. "If we're wrong, she could easily die like Arith."
"She is the last queen of Bendon. I won't permit it," Talia exclaimed when they found her in the Weir leader's quarters later. She and Binnick were eating a late-night snack. "Isn't it enough to kill your own dragon?" "Talia, she's trying to help," Binnick said scoldingly. "Fine. Let her try it on your dragon," Talia snapped. "If we give the cure to Minith, it will be passed on to her eggs," Selina told her. "We only have the one dose." "And Bendon has only the one queen," Talia snarled in reply. "Yes," Lorana agreed. "Minith is Bendon's last hope." "You say my eggs will live if I do this?" Minith asked Lorana. "I hope so," Lorana replied honestly. "I can do this," Minith told Lorana. "No!" Talia jumped up, scything toward Lorana with her nails. Binnick rose and clutched her, keeping her from striking Lorana. "No! I won't let you! You are not Minith's rider! Minith, go between! Now!" "No," Minith replied firmly. Talia's eyes widened in surprise. "I am Bendon's last queen. It is my duty." "Minith says she will do it," Lorana calmly informed the others. "No!" Talia protested. She turned to Binnick, pleading, "You can't let her! She killed her dragon and now she wants mine!" "This is our only hope," Minith said. From her weir, she bugled loudly. Her sound was interrupted by a sharp cough. "This is my only hope." "She's right, Talia," Lorana said. "We've tried everything else," Khitan agreed. Minith ducked her head in from her sleeping quarters. "What do I have to do?" I will inject you with this, Lorana said, holding up a syringe.
Well, do it then, Talia growled.
After it was done, she speared Lorana with a glare.
You can talk to all the dragons, can't you?
She didn't wait for a response.
Do you hear them die?
And feel them, Lorana admitted quietly.
Good,
Talia replied heartlessly, storming from the room into her dragon's quarters. Then whatever happens